Chapter 786. At this moment, Lu Feng and the Divine King of Godslayer were both paying close attention to Lu Tao's decision. This was because they knew that Lu Tao's decision would affect the existence of the Divine King. Their breathing stopped at this moment. In fact, the Divine King of Godslayer had hoped that Lu Tao would hesitate for a little longer. This was because Lu Feng had already said that he was about to reach his limit. Therefore, as long as he could stall for a little more time and wait for Lu Feng's body and soul to be unable to bear the burden, he would succeed. At that time, even if Lu Feng and Lu Tao really joined forces again, he wouldn't be afraid of anything. As long as Lu Feng didn't enter this forbidden domain, he would just be an existence that wasn't even a god. At the limit of his combat power, he would be a mere celestial god. If it was just Lu Tao, he wouldn't be afraid of anything. After nearly 10 minutes of battle, the Divine King of Godslayer could already feel that although Lu Tao's current power was terrifyingly powerful, it was still impossible for him to obliterate him. At that time, Lu Feng would lose his combat power. The existence of the Forbidden Domain would be dispensable. It wouldn't do any harm to him in battle. At that moment, it might even involve Lu Tao's energy to protect him. If that was really the case, then he would undoubtedly win. Therefore, he was willing to wait. However, it was a pity. His idea was good, but reality didn't go according to his plan. After thinking for a few seconds, Lu Tao had already completely reacted. He looked at the Divine King of Godslayer and Lu Feng, and a hint of hesitation flashed across his eyes. When he saw this, the God Punisher God King's eyes, which had never changed since the beginning of time, flashed with a hint of excitement. He knew that all such monstrous geniuses had their own pride. Their pride could be said to be above everything else. Joining forces with others, in the eyes of an existence like him, was a completely laughable method, a completely humiliating method. After all, in their current clash, he had not reached his limit. He had the upper hand. Therefore, he felt that Lu Tao would not join forces with him. But Lu Tao's voice rang out, causing the Divine King of Godslayers to feel despair. Xiaofeng, Daddy, join hands with you. At this moment, the Divine King of Godslayer was completely stunned. He really did not expect that Lu Tao would actually agree. At this moment, he thought of too many things, and the turmoil in his eyes became even more obvious. He was about to say something, but the moment he opened his mouth, a powerful killing intent had already arrived. That was Lu Feng's world-shaking slaughter, Lu Feng's violent and chaotic power. Since his father had already agreed, he would not waste any more time. The sooner he settled this, the less trouble he would have to face. Lu Feng's power, after entering the forbidden mythological domain, was comparable to any first-tier divine king at the pinnacle of the universe supreme realm. Facing any divine king at the pinnacle of the universe supreme realm, he had the ability to completely crush them. Previously, when the Sky Tual Lynx released his true form, he was absolutely a terrifying existence. Looking at the endless space and time, even among first-tier divine king at the pinnacle of the universe supreme realm, he was definitely among the pinnacle. But so what? In the face of Lu Feng's suppression, in the face of Lu Feng's ultimate power, there was no way he could resist at all. In just an instant, he was completely suppressed, completely suppressed. At the final moment, he even walked into the abyss of depravity. In the end, he allowed Lu Feng to complete the shocking and heaven-defying miracle, allowing Lu Feng to actually kill a king. And now, although this divine king also belonged to the God's Punisher organization, his existence was a real divine king. He did not have the terrifying power of the Sky Tual Lynx, nor did he have any special power. Therefore, at this moment, in front of this invincible emperor, he did not have the ability to resist at all. Lu Feng's punch was a simple punch, but he had poured all of his essence, energy, and spirit into it, and condensed it into a powerful, killing blow. Although he had now reached his limit, the feeling of his body and soul collapsing made it difficult for him to move. But Lu Feng still swung his fist. He was going to leave, but before he left, he wanted to leave safely. So this time, he was going to use his ultimate power to finish off his opponent. Die. There was no release of power in this punch. It was just a simple strike that did not contain any shocking phenomenon. It was just an extremely ordinary killing intent. However, it was precisely this seemingly simple and ordinary attack that truly caused one to feel despair and tremble. When the Divine King of the God's Punisher faced Lu Feng's frightening killing intent, all he could do was raise his arms slightly and put up a defensive stance. He was just the Divine King of the God's Punisher. He was not the heaven-defying Divine King. Although Lu Feng did not have a complete understanding of the space-time laws, he was still able to use the truth of space-time in this domain. Therefore, the Divine King of the God's Punisher was completely unable to dodge. In an instant, Lu Feng's fist descended and appeared completely, easily shattering everything. The Divine King's defense and the Divine King's physical body were both invincible existences. They were comparable to any quasi-king-level divine object. However, at this moment, such a terrifying physical body was actually penetrated by Lu Feng's fist. A fist penetrated the body of the Divine King of the God's Punisher. As the Divine King watched in disbelief, Lu Feng passed through. Behind him, the boundless sky was broken. This was a true break. This was not a crack that appeared when space-time was shattered by someone. It seemed like some kind of extreme power had broken through. Such a strange phenomenon left Lu Tao dumbfounded. At this moment, he sucked in a deep breath of cold air. Previously, he had already thought that when Lu Feng entered this domain, his power might be comparable to the true Divine King. However, at this moment, he finally understood that this was not a comparison. This was an existence that stood at the pinnacle. In front of this kind of Lu Feng, even if the Divine King of the God's Punisher of the God's Punisher's forbidden domain, he would still be unable to resist. This is my son's strength. After the shock passed, his eyes were filled with understanding, excitement, and pride. This was his son. This was his son, Emperor Lu Feng, a true emperor. In the next moment, he saw the severely injured Divine King in the void. Lu Tao finally stopped hesitating. His eyes were filled with endless turmoil. He finally raised his arm. I once said that today, the two of us, father and son, would fight the Supremes. Now it's time for the real battle. The father and son would fight the Supremes alone, but they would also fight together. Lu Tao's heart had already let go of those grudges. Although he also wanted to face everything by himself and rely on his own strength, this was no longer the right time. After all, the next variable might cause an accident to his son. He would never allow such a situation to occur. In Lu Tao's heart, everything, including his current strength, realm, status, and splendor, was far from comparable to Lu Feng's. Therefore, Lu Tao had only hesitated for a few moments before making up his mind. Now, after seeing that Lu Feng had already made his move and severely injured his opponent in an instant, he no longer hesitated and unleashed a truly unparalleled killing move. Godslayer. Behind him, Lu Tao's martial path avatar, the terrifying Godslayer, appeared. However, after it appeared, it didn't unleash any power. Instead, it completely disintegrated and enhanced Lu Tao's body. Lu Tao had entered the Monarch Path domain through his physical body. Although his martial path avatar had also undergone a qualitative sublimation in this collision, it wouldn't be of much help in a real battle. After all, his opponent was also in the Monarch Path forbidden domain. Therefore, Lu Tao was only using these to strengthen himself to the ultimate level. The power of the Godslayer disintegrated and enhanced Lu Tao's body completely. At the same time, a supreme power surged, and all the power surged. The vision condensed by Lu Tao descended and fused with his body. Now, he had really entered a kind of limit. He had really reached the peak of his life's glory. In his eyes was a dazzling radiance and an eternally trembling, murderous intent. Lu Tao had finally unleashed the ultimate power he was most proud of against the Divine King, who had already reached his limit. Annihilation. It had really been completely annihilated compared to the previous sky Tuo links. Lu Tao and Lu Feng had joined forces to annihilate everything. The Divine King had finally been completely annihilated. His own power couldn't be compared to the sky Tuo links'. Furthermore, Lu Tao and Lu Feng had joined forces. Therefore, his ending was many times worse than the sky Tuo links'. The sky Tuo links had been able to retain its complete body, although it had ultimately been reduced to ashes that had been determined by its nature. However, the current Divine King had truly been reduced to ashes. He had been completely annihilated. Annihilation. He had really been annihilated. Lu Tao exhaled gently and calmed himself down. Then, he took a step forward and arrived beside Lu Feng. In an instant, he had finally retreated from the invincible domain. At that moment, Lu Tao's body shook slightly and his face turned pale. After all, he was only a virtual king almighty. The price he had to pay in order to control the combat power of the Divine King was absolutely shocking. If he hadn't condensed the embryonic form of the world and transferred part of the damage to the world, he would probably have collapsed at this moment. There was a hint of lingering fear in his eyes. The next moment, he seemed to have thought of something and a hint of nervousness appeared in his eyes. His speed increased once again. Lu Tao flew directly towards the figure, standing quietly in the void. Even with his current body, this was still the case. What about Lu Feng? It should be known that Lu Feng's true realm was hundreds of millions of times lower than his. Furthermore, the mythical taboo realm of the physical body was far inferior to Lu Feng's mythical taboo realm of the power of power. He was really worried that Lu Feng would collapse. Lu Tao came to Lu Feng's side and looked at the endless bleak colors. His eyes were filled with an unusual color of pain. He reached out his hand to help Lu Feng, but he stopped abruptly when he reached out his hand, because he really didn't know what to do. Lu Feng's eyes were completely closed. His body was constantly trembling and swaying. Lu Tao knew Lu Feng very well. He knew that his son had always been resolute and unyielding no matter what kind of pain and torture he faced. But now his body was so turbulent and his face was so distorted. All this proved that Lu Feng's pain was at its limit. Looking at Lu Feng's uncomfortable appearance, Lu Tao's heart was filled with heavy emotions. Unfortunately, he couldn't do anything. The only thing he could do now was to watch and watch. Time passed slowly. After an unknown period of time, Lu Feng's tightly shut eyes finally showed a slight flicker. Seeing this scene, Lu Tao's heart was completely tangled. Chapter 787. Xiaofeng, are you awake? His voice was laced with nervousness. Lu Tao was no longer the same killing king who had been able to contend with the Divine King and even kill the Divine King at the last moment. He was just a father, an ordinary person who couldn't do anything about his child's suffering. Lu Feng didn't reply. His eyebrows twitched slightly before he calmed down once more. His body gradually stopped trembling and the contortion on his face gradually stopped. Although Lu Feng didn't reply, Lu Tao's heart calmed down slightly. At this moment, he felt slightly more at ease. Lu Feng's life aura, which had fluctuated intensely a moment ago, finally calmed down completely and became even more exuberant. Lu Tao understood that Lu Feng should have already made it through. There shouldn't be many obstacles left for him. Sure enough, just as Lu Tao had expected, Lu Feng's eyes started to move again. This time, he didn't have to wait for long. After a few swings, Lu Feng's eyes opened. The moment his eyes opened, the world seemed to have undergone a transformation. It was as if time and space had been completely shaken. This was a shocking tremor of power. This was a supreme mystic ability that could reverse the heavens and earth. This was the mystic ability of a king. Although Lu Feng had already retreated from the domain, he still retained the dignity of a true king the moment he woke up. This was the power of a king after all. Any living thing that saw it would feel endless fear. Lu Feng smiled weakly as he gazed at his father. "Father, I'm fine." When he saw Lu Feng's expression, Lu Tao finally relaxed. He knew that Lu Feng wouldn't lie to him. As if sensing Lu Tao's mood, Lu Feng smiled faintly again. There are still a few seconds left before I reach my limit. Although the longer it takes, the greater the damage I will suffer. I still haven't reached my limit. As long as I haven't reached my limit, I won't collapse completely. As long as he wasn't at his limit, Lu Feng could recover. Although it would take a long time, the embryonic form of the invincible combat body allowed his recovery ability to reach an astonishing level. That's good. You have to be careful in the future. Don't let yourself burn like this again. At this point, Lu Tao's eyes were filled with a solemn expression. The current era is no longer the era of the past. The sky today is a dirty sky. In such a world, anything can happen. You have to be careful at all times. Don't let yourself be in absolute danger. Otherwise, it will really be dangerous. The sky right now was a filthy sky. In the past, Lu Tao wouldn't have said such a thing. However, things were different now. Completely different. This was because there was now an additional layer of filth covering the sky. It was this layer of filth that caused the entire world to lose its original clarity. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. He knew what Lu Tao meant. He understood what the filth referred to. He sighed softly. His pale face was filled with an incomparably complicated expression. In the past, who would have thought that a faction that no one paid attention to would actually be such a terrifying existence? I'm afraid that no peak Overlord race or faction in the current universe can compare to them. Now that the Divine King had been born, the human race had once again suppressed the monarch race and become the true number one Overlord race in the universe. However, Lu Feng knew that even the human race couldn't truly take on the Godslayer race alone. The Godslayer race is really a terrifying peak Overlord race. In the past, they hadn't understood how terrifying the Godslayer race was. However, this time, they completely understood. This was simply a horror that defied all natural order. This time, a time Overlord had appeared. There were actually 8 Universe Supremes. This lineup was even greater than all the previous peak Overlord races combined. The Divine King had even more Universe Supremes. With such strength, it would be extremely easy for the Godslayer race to sweep through anything. It could even be said that it was as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. Lu Feng's heart shuddered and swayed. His voice was filled with an incomparable solemnity. Looking at Lu Tao beside him, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment before telling him about the Divine King and the Lynx. Upon hearing this, Lu Tao's first reaction was shock. He couldn't believe it. However, when he saw Lu Feng's extremely solemn and even dignified expression, he fell silent. Lu Tao knew that Lu Feng wouldn't lie to him. Therefore, what Lu Feng said was true. However, could such a situation really happen? Could it really happen? Could it really happen? Because everything had already happened. Weren't the Divine King of Chaos and the Divine King of Heaven the clearest examples? They had both been betrayed by their own martial path incarnations. After a moment of silence, Lu Tao let out a deep breath and looked at Lu Feng again. So, the most terrifying secret and curse of the universe, which caused the Divine King to die a horrible death, was actually created by the Godslayer race? If it was in the past, Lu Tao wouldn't have believed it. After all, this curse involved almost all the Divine Kings since ancient times. Moreover, not only were the overlords of the 3 eras involved, but also the ultimate invincible existence like the human king primogenitor. Such a terrifying thing shouldn't be something that an organization like the Godslayer race could do. However, it was different now. If they could even make their martial path incarnations betray them, what else couldn't they do? Lu Feng nodded slightly and then shook his head. They might be really terrifying, but I believe that the Lynx is right. The Godslayer race shouldn't have the power to kill the epic overlords. The epic overlords weren't comparable to the chrono overlords. They were on 2 completely different levels. Want the chrono overlords to suppress the epic overlords? Impossible, completely impossible. Even if a few dozen or even 100 temporal overlords joined forces, it would still be impossible. The epic overlords are existences that can integrate their soul imprints into the historical epics. The combat power they can use is unlimited. They can be blessed by the entire era. Therefore, the epic overlords aren't existences that these creatures can resist. It's completely impossible, even if there are many chrono overlords. That was indeed the case. The epic overlords weren't existences that could be defeated by numbers. It was just like how no number of creatures could resist a divine king who had entered the divine king's forbidden mythological domain. Therefore, Lu Tao didn't doubt what Lu Feng said this time. He nodded slightly. Lu Feng continued, "It should be said that the curse of the divine king to die a horrible death had a lot to do with the God-Slayer race. After all, many things were directly caused by them. However, this relationship can't be said to be complete. After all, they don't have such power. However, although they don't have the power to obliterate the epic overlords, their existences are already terrifying enough. I don't know if there's anything in the current era that can stop them." At this moment, Lu Tao's eyes were incomparably solemn. He really didn't know if there was anything in the current era that could stop them. After all, according to Lu Feng, there wasn't only one chrono overlord in the God-Slayer race. The father and son looked at each other and saw the indescribably complicated expression in each other's eyes. They sighed softly. In the end, there was only silence, a kind of complete silence. However, this silence didn't last for too long. It really didn't last for too long, because in the next moment, a shocking crack appeared in the void, and a shocking figure appeared. As the figure walked gently, the mark of the era intertwined, and the sigh of time of heaven and earth appeared as though it was an eternal glory. This was a simple figure. When he walked over, any living being would have to kneel down and worship him with the utmost sincerity. This should have been a figure that countless living beings would look up to, a figure that they would truly and deeply worship. However, the moment they saw him, both Lu Feng and Lu Tao were truly shocked. It was truly an indescribable color. It was an indescribable color. It was a color that couldn't be described at all. They really saw it. They saw the scene that they guessed, but didn't want to face. It's the Chrono Overlord. It's the Chrono Overlord. The one walking towards them was the Overlord of Time, the true Overlord of Time, a truly invincible Overlord of Time in the current era. The Chrono Overlord should be praised by countless living beings. However, when Lu Feng and his son saw him, they felt an indescribable emotion. The most intense emotion was a stirring and tragic feeling. "Father, I didn't expect our guess to be so accurate." Really, it was that accurate. Previously, they were still guessing that there wasn't just one Chrono Overlord. However, as soon as they finished guessing, he arrived. The Chrono Overlord had arrived. This was the true Chrono Overlord. Even if the two of them were at their peak, they wouldn't be able to contend against the Chrono Overlord. They simply couldn't do anything against the Chrono Overlord. Moreover, the two of them had just finished a shocking battle. They didn't have any power left. Looking at the figure walking towards them step by step, Lu Feng's heart was in turmoil. He knew that this was the most dangerous situation he had ever been in. This was the most dangerous situation he had ever been in his life. However, he couldn't retreat. He absolutely couldn't retreat. Lu Tao's voice rang in his ears. "Xiaofeng, Father will break the taboo again in a moment and enter the Divine King's mythological domain. At that time, I will do everything in my power to destroy everything. I will burn my life force and soul. I will let my bloodline burn limitlessly." At this moment, Lu Tao had already walked in front of Lu Feng. Everything was just as he had said. From the moment he stood up again, he would protect Lu Feng. He would forever stand in front of Lu Feng and block everything for Lu Feng. Chapter 788. After I burn everything, I will summon the imprint of the human king, the ancestor of the Lu family. Then, for a moment, I will have the power to contend with him. At that moment, you can run. Run with all your might. Leave the battlefield in the outer domain and escape to those barren areas in the original universe. Cultivate quietly and break through quietly. Wait for the day when you're truly strong enough, when you can truly enter this realm, when you are fearless in the face of anything, when you can easily suppress them, when you return, when you return to this era of the mortal world and help me take revenge, Xiaofeng, don't be too stubborn. You should be rational now. Don't be impulsive. You must know that in the future, He didn't finish his sentence, because at this moment, he couldn't move. He really couldn't move. Looking at the figure walking past him, Lu Tao was completely dumbfounded at this moment. Dad, leave the rest to me. Lu Feng turned around and looked at Lu Tao, who had been completely restrained by a sneak attack. He smiled gently. Lu Feng smiled. He really smiled. Lu Feng's eyes were so calm, so warm, and filled with an endless carefree smile. Lu Tao understood this smile. He understood. If Lu Feng hadn't stopped him just now, the one smiling would have been him. It would have been him, Lu Tao Xiaofeng. This was what Lu Tao wanted to say the most at this moment, but it was something he would never be able to say. Looking at Lu Feng, who was radiating eternal invincible light and exuding an endless supreme aura, and looking at his son, whom he seemed to have never seen before, Lu Tao really forgot how to speak. He really forgot everything he wanted to say. Lu Feng had broken the shackles again. He had entered that domain again, a domain that truly belonged to the invincible supreme beings of the universe. But what could he do? So what? Lu Feng, was only Emperor Lu Feng. He had only entered the domain of a first-level universe sovereign, and his opponent was Time Overlord, a truly invincible Time Overlord who could completely suppress him with a single punch. He had entered that realm. What could he do? What could he do? What was the use of him? He used all his strength to break free from Lu Feng's shackles. But at this moment, Lu Tao sadly discovered that he had no other way. He really had no other way. Lu Feng had sealed him after he had entered the forbidden mythological domain of combat power. That was almost the pinnacle power of the supreme domain of the universe. Even if he was at his peak, he would not have any way to resist Lu Feng's seal. Therefore, the only thing Lu Tao could do was to stare blankly at everything that was happening. He looked at Lu Feng and smiled gently at him. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped. As someone who had also comprehended the laws of time and space, Lu Tao naturally understood that this was the application of the truth of time and space. Lu Tao knew that Lu Feng had used the power of time and space to completely seal him. Dad, do you still remember? Do you still remember that when we were on Human King Planet, you always liked to take me to some high places and let me look down from there? I remember that time you said that you hoped I could remember the feeling of looking down on billions of people from a high place. You said that this was what a great being should have. Even if I didn't have the aptitude to be a great being, you wanted me to have the heart of a great being. In Lu Feng's eyes, it was as if he was recalling the scenes from the past. He recalled everything that he had experienced in the past. His smiling face actually began to slowly moisten. Lu Tao was speechless. At this moment, even if he could say something, he realized that he couldn't say anything. Lu Feng's voice didn't stop. It was still going on. Dad, do you still remember? When I was bullied in the Lu family, it was you who broke off with the family and took me out. Do you still remember? It was you who sealed my memories. Do you still remember? It was you who gave me a complete childhood. Do you still remember? It was you who lived a carefree life with me. You and my mother cooked for me, played with me, and played with me year after year. Do you still remember? It was you. It was you, it was you, it was still you. It was you, it was you, it was still you. Everything was you, did you know that? You are the greatest father in my heart. It wasn't because of your identity as a godslayer in the past, nor was it because of the shocking miracle you created in the past. It was only because you were the one who protected me, the one I loved the most, my father. Lu Feng's voice trembled endlessly. His body was already starting to collapse. Once again, he entered the forbidden realm of combat power. Lu Feng was really at his limit. 10 minutes had passed. It was really over. He was already unable to support anything anymore. At this moment, Lu Feng could clearly feel his soul collapsing and his physical body turning into nothingness. However, he was still smiling even though he was enduring the ultimate agony. Because at this moment, Lu Feng was reminiscing. He was reminiscing about everything he had experienced in the past. Those were all so sweet, and they were all his most precious memories. Therefore, Although it was so painful, when he recalled everything, he didn't feel any pain. He didn't feel any pain at all. What he felt was only one kind of the most beautiful. In front of him, the epic Overlord was already moving slowly towards Lu Feng. A casual movement from him could shake the entire universe and shatter the universe. His existence alone was the interpretation of truth, destiny, karma, and the ultimate truth. This was the time Overlord. He had already seen Lu Feng's state. He already understood that Lu Feng had really reached his limit. He was really starting to collapse completely. At this moment, even if he didn't take action, Lu Feng would still end up dead. He would definitely be annihilated. Of course, even if Lu Feng was still in his peak state, he wasn't worried at all, because he was the time Overlord, an existence that an overlord of the universe like Lu Feng could never touch. He suppressed Lu Feng very easily, unusually easily. He didn't need to care at all, regardless of whether Lu Feng was in his peak state or in his normal state. A voice rang out at this moment. "Emperor, you are indeed an emperor. I didn't expect that you would choose to seal your father and burn yourself at the last moment. However, do you think this will really work? Or do you think that you can rely on this to let your father leave safely?" I really laughed. I really smiled. Even if two supreme divine kings were at their peak, they would not be able to escape from his hands, not to mention two supreme divine kings at such a level. Lu Feng didn't answer, because he was currently condensing his invincible power, his most powerful power. The Lu family of human kings is really terrifying and shocking. I never thought that you could reach such a level in an era without a human king. A family with two kings. In fact, the real shocking part of the Lu family is you and your father. Two kings. Both of you are true supreme young kings. Both of you are true supreme kings. Both of you are the true supreme divine king. I'm afraid that even those in the organization wouldn't have thought of this. 2 years, it's only 2 years. An ant that they look down on has actually reached such a high level. You started the battle of the kings and became invincible. On the path of the stars, on the path of the battle of the kings, you walked at the forefront of everyone, reaching a height that no one could reach. I'm afraid that they would never have dreamed that this ant they looked down on would have the power to obliterate them after shattering his domain. Finally, the time Overlord's footsteps stopped. At this moment, he looked at Lu Feng, his eyes filled with endless turmoil, a kind of shocking madness and terror. Because he really felt it. You actually, after spitting out those 3 words, the time Overlord finally gave up on everything and started to improve crazily. In the past, the existence that he had thought was extremely weak, an existence that he could kill with a wave of his hand, had actually become so shocking and terrifying right now. He seemed to vaguely recall the words that the supreme existence in the organization, the prophet, had once said about Lu Feng. An emperor is truly the most terrifying emperor in all of history. When facing him, if you really decide to kill him, don't hesitate, don't indulge, and don't waste any time. Seize everything. In that instant, completely obliterate him. Seize everything and obliterate him in an instant. Obliterate him, obliterate him, obliterate him. These are the final words spoken by the prophet, words that everyone had to remember. Of course, in the eyes of many people, Lu Feng was extremely disdainful. In their minds, if Lu Feng wanted to defeat them, it would take at least hundreds or even thousands of years. However, no one had expected that Lu Feng would actually complete such a transformation in just 2 years. Now, he had already reached such a level. He had already become such a terrifying existence. Just a moment ago, he had mocked those who looked down on Lu Feng as ignorant and ignorant people in front of Lu Feng. However, at this moment, an even more ironic scene appeared. It seemed that he was as ignorant as those people. In his eyes, there was an indescribable radiance. Lu Feng finally stopped looking at Lu Tao, because from this moment on, he was no longer Lu Feng, the son of the God Slayer. He was Emperor Lu Feng. This time, he was going to swing his fists once more. He was going to use his greatest strength once more. He was going to truly face his enemies once more. He was going to truly fight for his own protection. He was going to slaughter his way through the sky. At this moment, Lu Feng's brilliance flickered millions of times. His voice resounded through space and time. Supreme Law, Supreme. Chapter 789. The Supreme Law of the World. Every time he used this ultimate power, Lu Feng's body would be injured to a certain extent. Now that he had used it in such a situation, there was no doubt that Lu Feng had given up everything. He was like the young Netherworld king in the past. He had completely given up everything for a goal and used the irreversible life ignition. Lu Tao stared blankly. His eyes were already filled with confusion. At this moment, his mind was blank. He could no longer think of anything. Turbulence, complete turbulence. Looking at the time Overlord in front of him, who had also increased his endless power, Lu Feng's eyes were full of smiles. It was a crazy smile, a smile of nostalgia, a smile of sadness, a smile of despair, and a smile of anticipation. Time Overlord? Yes, he really couldn't contend against it. Even if he hadn't gone through the previous battle and hadn't suffered any injuries, he still couldn't win in his peak state. After all, that was the time Overlord. He hadn't entered this domain by himself. He had temporarily entered by shattering the Divine King's forbidden mythological domain. Therefore, when facing the time Overlord, Lu Feng had no way to win. At least, he had no way to win with his combat strength. But just because he didn't have a way to win, it didn't mean that he didn't have a way to kill his opponent. Because he still had the most terrifying power, the so-called ultimate power that he hadn't used. Although using it in such a state was equivalent to suicide. But now, did he have any other choice? Let his father burn his life to summon the Man-King's imprint? Good, very good. The final result would be his father dying and disappearing forever. In order to protect him, would he let his indomitable father, who had protected him, die? Lu Feng couldn't do it. He really couldn't do it. Now that he had reached his current realm, all his pursuits had gradually faded away. He didn't need to deliberately pursue it anymore. Now, the only reason he wanted to be strong was to protect. It was to protect the people he should protect in the future. And now, it was time for his protection to be destroyed. If he chose to compromise this time, then he would do the same in the future. Furthermore, the person he was protecting this time was his father, the father he had respected and loved the most since he was young, the father who was a hero in his heart. How could he, Lu Feng, give up? How could he take a step back? How could he escape safely? Therefore, the moment the temporal Overlord appeared, everything had already been decided. Everything had already been decided. As Lu Feng looked at the Overlord of Time across from him, he felt like he was ascending to a higher level. And the simplest way to do that was to use a supreme magic. Lu Feng had never sublimated so crazily before. He had never used a supreme technique in such an unbridled manner. Lord of the Only. Although the level of Lord of the Only was still not high, after entering this mysterious, forbidden, mythological realm of combat power, all of his existence had been given a qualitative upgrade. Although he couldn't understand this kind of qualitative improvement, an improvement was an improvement. His strength had also undergone a terrifying upgrade. He had entered the Divine King's supreme domain. Otherwise, how could he have been so strong that he could suppress a supreme Divine King so easily? Therefore, the supreme technique Lord of the Only that was being used at this moment was really the ultimate form of Lord of the Only. Lu Feng could feel that his entire body and soul were burning crazily at this moment. This was a kind of thorough burning. It was the most intense burning after using the forbidden mythological realm of combat power and the supreme technique. Lu Tao, who was behind him, looked at Lu Feng. His eyes finally regained some clarity. He struggled frantically, wanting to shout and stop this. However, he sadly discovered that he couldn't break free at all. He couldn't break free from the binding Lu Feng had placed on him. At this moment, Lu Tao was sorrowful, extremely sorrowful. In the past, he had thought that after shattering that domain, and entering the God King's forbidden mythological domain, he already had the battle prowess of a true God King. He was already the strongest person in the Lu family in terms of battle prowess. He had once thought that with the strongest combat power, he wouldn't have to worry so much. He would be able to let the people he was protecting feel more at ease. However, it was a pity, sorrow, and despair. This was the first time he had used his strongest power. However, this was the first time he had appeared and used his strongest power. He had let the people he was protecting burn everything in order to protect him. An indescribable feeling was constantly devouring Lu Tao's heart. It really made him feel endless despair. Lu Feng's burning didn't stop. In an instant, his soul became depressed and his body became transparent. However, Lu Feng wasn't done yet. Under this kind of pain, he was still smiling. It was still that incomparably complicated smile. In the next moment, a peerless brilliance suddenly appeared from Lu Feng's body. In the void, a terrifyingly huge shadow appeared. That was a world. A real world. That was a mortal world. However, this was still not the end. This was because how could one mortal world be enough? How could it be enough? In the blink of an eye, the world began to split apart. One mortal world became 10, and then 100. In the final moment, the once complete mortal world actually split infinitely and became an unprecedented million worlds. A million worlds. This was a million worlds. Any single world was incomparably huge. When a million worlds appeared, they covered everything and covered everything. Outside the medicine god territory, in the countless territories, everyone stared blankly into the distance. The million worlds that filled the void of time were completely at a loss. In the next moment, the existences of the various major races that were frantically fleeing completely stopped in their tracks. They looked into the distance at the millions of worlds and were also completely dumbfounded. At this moment, regardless of whether it was the great ancestor or the heavenly demon quasi-king, those invincible mighty figures or those ordinary mighty figures, regardless of whether it was those deities or those monstrous geniuses, all of them were silent and stunned. This kind of power, it's an emperor's. This kind of power was an emperor's. They knew, they really knew, because not long ago, Lu Feng used this kind of power to crush all of his opponents and create a shocking sacred site. It allowed him to completely break the taboo and enter the realm of invincibility. How could they not know? That's a billion mortal worlds, a billion immortals. That's a billion mortal worlds, a billion immortals. But this time, it's actually, in the past, Lu Feng had only used a billion mortal worlds, a billion immortals twice in this era. The first time was when he completed the shocking sacred site and suppressed Rong Yuanyu, a true god. The second time, he had used it against the combined forces of the 6 paramount monarchs and their combined supreme magic. The fact that he had used it twice meant that he had obtained 2 shocking miracles. But those 2 times, he only used 1 world and 1 immortal. How could it be the same as now, where a million worlds had appeared? This was simply covering the medicine god territory, which was comparable to dozens or even hundreds of super galaxies. Just the 1 million worlds that Lu Feng used, if spread out, would be much, much larger than the medicine god territory. What kind of existence can make the emperor use such invincible power after entering such a realm? Just now, the emperor killed a divine king, supreme king, and not long after, it seems that another divine king was also killed by the killer king. Then they should be safe. But why? Why is the emperor using such power at the risk of his life? Countless people were shocked and puzzled. They wanted to know the truth and wanted to enter the depths of the battlefield. But in the end, when they saw the million worlds, they stopped in their tracks, because they knew that the current battle was not something they could participate in. In such a battle, they could really kill a divine king. And if they went in, they would definitely die. Looking at the million worlds in the distance, everyone's heart was in turmoil like never before. A million worlds, this is a million mortal worlds, then next it should be their expressions changed drastically. Now, it was a million worlds. Then, next, they should be. As if to prove these people's thoughts, the moment their voices disappeared, a supreme power that could destroy endless time and space erupted in the deepest part of the divine medicine god territory. That was a million ultimate power, a million immortal and demon imprints, a million eternal eras, a million immortals, a million immortals, a million immortals. It was really a million immortals. More than a million immortals appeared out of nowhere and controlled more than a million mortal worlds. No one knew which immortal Lu Feng had turned into and which world he had merged with. However, they knew that this massacre would be the ultimate annihilation in this epic, or even the endless epics. It was a terrifying massacre that ranked at the pinnacle. Lu Feng stood at the peak of the void. His body finally collapsed completely. What existed at this moment was only a faint power, a hazy form of will. But it was this form of will that controlled the million immortals. Beside him, another existence that looked exactly like him also floated. But there was no expression on his face, as if he was a statue. Looking at the other him, Lu Feng's eyes shone with a strange light. I didn't expect that this would be our last battle. A billion mortal worlds, a billion immortals. I am an immortal, controlling all of them. And you are the world, condensing a million worlds. Let us complete this unprecedented glory and this world-shaking miracle of the universe. Luo Yinyang's second primordial spirit nodded his head gently. He was actually smiling. After completing the primordial sutra, the second primordial spirit seemed to have begun to transform. It had entered a realm that it had never experienced before. It had almost gained complete intelligence. Lu Feng believed that if he really completed the Origin Sutra and reached the pinnacle, his strength would be unimaginable. At that time, the second primordial spirit would certainly enter a new realm and become an independent entity with complete intelligence. A second primordial spirit in such a state could be considered truly terrifying. However, all of this was Lu Feng's imagination. It could only be his imagination. Because of the future, Lu Feng knew that he no longer had a future. His future was no longer a future. This time, it was already a hopeless situation. It was a hopeless situation. Just like the young underworld monarch in the past, he had already embarked on a path of no return. However, Lu Feng didn't regret it. He didn't regret it in the slightest. He had taken this step for the sake of protecting his loved ones. He really didn't regret it. He would never regret it. Chapter 790. In an instant, the flames had burned to the extreme, and Lu Feng was completely blurred. At this moment, he had entered an extreme state. He had transformed into an immortal, the ultimate ruler of millions of immortals, the only existence, the true supreme ruler of the immortal king. His power shook time and space. The second primordial spirit controlled millions of worlds, millions of mortal worlds, crushing everything, covering boundless space, the ultimate lawless existence. The two ultimate unrivaled existences joined forces. The most terrifying power shook time and space, causing the universe to collapse and time to tremble. When he saw the time Overlord in the distance, who had also entered the invincible domain, an indescribable fear appeared in the eyes of Lu Feng's remnant figure. At this moment, his arm was finally raised completely. Finally, at this moment, it was a complete summon. At this moment, as the supreme immortal king of millions of immortals, Lu Feng's voice was transmitted through millions of immortals, repeated by millions of immortals. In a trance, the existence of this voice was actually a supreme power, a source of power that could shake heaven and earth, a deterrent that could dry up time. Although I have entered this domain, I am still not your match. Although I will not have such an opportunity again in this life. However, at this moment, I already possess sufficient power. I already possess sufficient power to obliterate you. Even if I use up all the glory, prosperity, hope, and faith in my life, I will still protect my protector. So, let's fall together. His arm slowly fell to the ground, boundless power continued to reach its peak and began to erupt. 1 billion mortal worlds, 1 billion immortals, the ultimate immortal technique, 1 billion mortal worlds, 1 billion immortals. This was Lu Feng's ultimate power, the ultimate power. The power he displayed now was 1 million mortal worlds, 1 million immortals, 1 million immortals, although it was still a long way from the true ultimate realm. But the power at this moment was really indescribable eruption, a torrential downpour, an eruption, a complete eruption. The heavens fell and the earth cracked. A hazy gap appeared in the era. The time source was constantly disappearing, and the marks of time and space were constantly being annihilated. This blow seemed to be able to completely end the entire era of the universe. In the past, 1 billion mortal worlds and 1 billion immortals had appeared on the sacred steel that made the origin of the universe go crazy. According to the records on the sacred steel, this was the ultimate power that could completely annihilate the universe. It was a supreme power that could break the era of the universe. This was a true disaster-level power, more terrifying than the great calamity of the universe. Lu Feng had finally used it, and he had used it completely. At this moment, Lu Feng's opponent, the second Overlord of Time, the power of the universe, also reached an indescribable level. As he looked at Lu Feng's ultimate power, his eyes were filled with bewilderment, shock, helplessness, and despair. He finally understood. He finally understood what the terror of an emperor was referring to. An emperor was just an ant that wasn't even a god. However, the power he used now was something that even he couldn't describe. It was something that couldn't be compared to. The Overlord of Time knew that after Lu Feng used this power, he would definitely fall. However, at the same time, he didn't have any hope. He had also lost hope. His last words were a deep sigh. He was still shaken. Eternal detention. Eternal detention. This was the ultimate power of the Overlord of Time. It was his ultimate technique. At such a moment, he no longer held back in the face of the ultimate immortal technique. He unleashed his most invincible power, a collision. In the current universe, in the endless eras, the greatest collision had occurred. At the last moment, Lu Feng stretched out his arm and waved it gently. In the void behind Lu Feng, in the space that hadn't been completely annihilated, a crack appeared. It was a crack that led to an unknown place. Lu Feng looked at Lu Tao, who was in a daze and unable to move. He smiled. He had already lost his physical form. Only his soul was left. However, Lu Feng still smiled. She still tried her best to show the happiest smile. "Dad, your son didn't disappoint you, right?" Time froze completely at this moment. Lu Tao knew that Lu Feng had used his most powerful power to freeze time completely. He wanted to use the last bit of time to bid farewell to himself. Lu Tao still couldn't say anything. He knew that Lu Feng had done this on purpose. Lu Feng didn't want him to say anything sad. Lu Feng wanted to leave in peace. He wanted to leave in comfort. He didn't want to leave behind any pain. "Dad, I will send you out of here. Mom will depend on you to take care of her in the future. My friends will also depend on you to help them. Tell Mom that your son is unfilial. However, your son is worthy of her pride, because your son has never taken a step back. Your son is really worthy of her pride. Remember to tell Qingran and Shuiyin that I have let them down. If there's a next life, let me make it up to them." That last glance was so complicated that even Lu Tao couldn't understand it, nor could he understand it. This was the last glance he could see. At the last moment, his body had been sent into the space-time tunnel by Lu Feng. The moment the space-time tunnel closed, Lu Tao felt his power of power gradually recovering. However, the speed of recovery was too slow. It wasn't until he left the space-time tunnel that he finally recovered completely. However, he had already appeared in the primal universe. He no longer had any chance, eternal detention. This was the ultimate move of time Overlord, being detained for tens of thousands of years, turning those years into his own strength, annihilating everything. Such strength was absolutely unprecedented. This was because the 10,000 years of time Overlord's lifespan was 10,000 years. It used 10,000 years of lifespan to create an invincible ultimate move. This was definitely a truly invincible power. If it had been any other time, such a move would have been able to wipe out the entire history of an era. Unfortunately, although it was the condensation of 10,000 years of life of time Overlord, it was facing 1 million worlds and 1 million immortals. There was an absolute fundamental difference between the two. If Lu Feng's real realm wasn't too low, if his current realm wasn't too low, then the 1 billion mortal dust and 1 billion immortals that came out at this moment could absolutely annihilate everything. Annihilate everything. The collision was simple, very simple. In an instant, 1 million worlds collapsed and the life of time Overlord was completely annihilated. The next moment, the power of 1 million immortals arrived and annihilated everything. Everything was so simple, Medicine God domain had completely withered. It was completely annihilated. The Medicine God domain, which was once one of the 5 great independent domains and was famous throughout the entire universe, had completely disappeared. It had actually been erased forever. Countless living beings had completely disappeared in this ultimate confrontation. Not only had the Medicine God territory disappeared, but even the countless territories adjacent to the Medicine God territory had also disappeared. Many of them had been annihilated. Although they still existed, they had already turned into ruins and were almost completely abandoned. The destruction caused by the ultimate collision was simply indescribable. No one knew exactly how many living beings had been annihilated by the collision between the two, because there were too many places that had been affected by the disaster. There were too many living beings on these lands. Countless years later, when people came to the edge of the Medicine God domain and saw the completely empty Medicine God domain, they were still filled with endless fear and couldn't suppress the shock in their hearts. The Medicine God domain was an area that was larger than hundreds of super life-bearing galaxies. This was a battlefield in outer regions, an area protected by the Endless Protection Law. In this place, any destructive force would be weakened by thousands of times. However, even so, the entire Medicine God domain had completely disappeared and been annihilated. No one could imagine what kind of earth-shattering destruction such a collision would cause in the outside world. At the center of the endless annihilation, a figure stood there quietly, looking at a mottled body floating in the void. An indescribable color flashed through his hazy eyes. When he sensed that the life aura on his body was gradually extinguishing, he hesitated for a moment. In the end, he stretched out his arm and a massive annihilation power gathered. This power wasn't considered massive, but the essence condensed within it, the true essence of destruction, was incomparable to anything else. If Lu Feng still existed, he would be truly shocked to the extreme. This kind of destructive power and the true essence of destruction was already the limit. It was already the limit of his imagination. At this level, he was only a little bit away from the ultimate realm of destruction he had imagined, the great calamity of the universe. Even when he entered the forbidden mythological domain of combat power, he was far from being able to reach such a terrifying level. However, at this moment, the hazy figure had completed it with a slight wave of his arm. Such an existence was definitely unimaginable to Lu Feng. Nobody knew that in this space-time, in this era where the so-called Divine King was rare, there were actually so many hidden existences. There were already 2 temporal overlords. This was twice the number of temporal overlords in the entire universe. Now, another such existence had appeared. This kind of existence was completely indescribable. The destructive power that had captured Lu Feng's body had completely condensed and taken form. As long as it was put down gently, the last remnants of Lu Feng's body would be completely annihilated and disappear. The figure shook his head gently as he looked at Lu Feng in front of him. Chapter 791. Originally, you had the hope to walk through the limit together with us, to enter the peak together, to witness the glory of history together. Unfortunately, you are his descendant. Unfortunately, you have chosen a path that is different from ours. Unfortunately, truly unfortunate. It is truly unfortunate for an existence like you. Truly unfortunate. You have already surpassed his existence. His arms slowly descending towards Lu Feng's body. Do you still remember the agreement we made in the past? The arms slightly froze in midair. The terrifying power in his hand, the true essence of destruction, had completely disappeared. It had completely disappeared. This was not because he wanted to give up, nor was he deliberately doing this. He had no choice but to do this. Just because of a simple sentence, just because of a simple voice, everything was dispelled and completely annihilated. It was unimaginable how terrifying the owner of that voice was. The hazy figure trembled slightly. This was not out of fear, but a natural tremor. In the next moment, a strange phenomenon appeared in the void. A terrifying, colossal figure stood tall, suppressing all of the terrifying figures. He stood quietly between heaven and earth, like a supreme king, the noblest king, an eternally invincible king. His existence alone, without any extravagant scenes, without any peerless support, just standing there quietly, seemed to be the interpretation of a supreme being, a king of heaven and earth, an emperor, even the interpretation of a supreme emperor. He was truly an emperor. Compared to the previous imperial princes, his majesty as an emperor was more than 1 billion times stronger. Even Lu Feng, who had entered the forbidden realm of battle power, Lu Feng's majesty as an emperor was worlds apart from his. This was the true and complete great emperor, the true and complete ancient invincible great emperor. Possessing this kind of power was a complete display of invincibility. The reason for this level was not because he had condensed some supreme cultivation technique, nor was it because he had obtained some amazing treasure. Emperor. He was the emperor. He was the 5 taboo kings passed down from the primordial immortal devil era, the true emperors who had never appeared in history, but who really existed. The great space-time anomaly walked gently and came directly before the hazy figure. At this moment, the giant avatar looked at the tiny figure in front of him, and his expression was one of endless terror. Do you still remember the agreement we made in the past? Silence, still silence. After a long time, the illusory figure finally let out a sigh. I remember. We agreed that the outer region battlefield belongs to you. As for the original universe, it belongs to us. There will be no involvement or collusion between us. We are not allowed to touch or set foot on anything here. The original universe belongs to us. The outer region battlefield belongs to you. It was a simple sentence, but it determined the ownership of these 2 territories. Such a division completely ignored any pinnacle overlord race, completely ignoring the divine king of those pinnacle overlords. However, if there was really a being here, even if the supreme beings of the various pinnacle overlords were here, they would not be able to say anything. Because at this moment, regardless of whether it was the hazy being or the Emperor Avatar, they were far from being comparable. These 2 supreme beings were enough to sweep away everything with their power alone, and they were the ultimate beings who could shock and awe all eternity. Or perhaps this was a form of speechless mockery. In the original universe, the regions that had been opened up had all been occupied by the pinnacle overlords. They had separated and announced the ownership of those regions. As for the outer region battlefield, they saw it as something that was already in their pockets. It was a territory that no one could invade and no one could touch. However, that was not the case at all. They saw the place as their own, but in fact, the original owners were not them. This was the biggest mockery, the biggest joke in the world. The 2 great beings looked at each other. They seemed to be waiting for something. After a long time, the hazy being finally spoke. Emperor, this time, let me annihilate him. This is considered a favor that I owe you. In the future, if you need anything, feel free to say it. We will do it. This was undoubtedly a great promise. To be able to make such a great being say such a thing, to be able to get such a promise from such a great being, this was absolutely shocking, and it would make countless beings go crazy. However, in the face of all this, the Emperor only smiled indifferently. Your promise, do I need it? Your promise, do I need it? Or maybe someone else needs it. Someone else really needs it. But to me, it doesn't matter at all. I don't need anything at all. Not even a little bit. Silence. The only thing that the hazy being could do at this moment was to remain silent. He could only remain silent. He knew that the Emperor was right, not wrong at all. The Emperor, was a terrifying being. After his original body descended, he was even more powerful than a few of them. Yes, he was a being of that level. If they could fulfill their promises, the Emperor could also fulfill them. Moreover, the Emperor didn't need them to do anything at all. In the next moment, he raised his head and looked at the Emperor's terrifying figure. Are you really going to protect him? You have to know that he is known as the Emperor, and he is the one who took your title. In the future, when he really enters such a realm, I'm afraid that he will definitely challenge you. He will truly challenge you. Don't tell me that you are not tempted to eliminate him in advance. Hearing this, the Emperor was silent and serene. At this moment, his expression was almost exactly the same as Lu Feng's. It was exactly the same. However, compared to Lu Fenglai, his silence and tranquility were even more extreme, and it was indescribable. This was the true aura of an emperor, the complete aura of an emperor. When he was quiet, heaven and earth would sink, and life would cease to exist. When he moved, time and space would tremble, and time would crack. He had demonstrated the true essence of an emperor more thoroughly, and it was even more quintessential. Looking at the hazy being, the emperor's voice slowly sounded. There will be a battle between us sooner or later. This is our destiny. However, that is only our destiny. It does not have anything to do with you. Even if he dies, he can only die by my hands. None of you have the right to kill him. None of you have the right to do so. This time, you entered the foreign battlefield and caused such terrible destruction. Originally, this was unforgivable. But now, all of you have paid a price. That's why I won't do anything this time. However, I will not allow those who are still lingering in the foreign battlefield to exist. Hearing this, the hazy being nodded gently. In that case, if that's the case, then let them die. It was as if he didn't feel any heartache about the deaths of the Divine King. However, in the next moment, the hazy being looked at the Emperor again. At this moment, the void seemed to tremble. He seemed to have made a great decision. Your Majesty, this time, we are determined to get him. For this, we are willing to pay any price. Even if it means becoming your enemy, we will still take action. Hearing this, the Emperor did not remain silent. At this moment, the only expression on his face was laughter. It was a completely crazy laughter, a laughter that shook heaven and earth. His laughter caused heaven and earth to tremble. This was the space-time of annihilation. This was the space-time of annihilation after the collision between the 1 billion immortals and the 1 billion immortals. However, at this moment, this already annihilated region trembled again amidst the Emperor's laughter. It seemed like there was more destruction to come. The laughter gradually stopped. At this moment, the Emperor's voice rang out clearly. You, or the few of you, do not hesitate to become my enemy. You, do you want to become my enemy? You, do you really dare to become my enemy? What a joke, what a joke. This is the biggest joke in the world. Hearing this laughter, the hazy being fell silent. However, the surrounding space-time was trembling nonstop. At this level, it was much stronger than when Lu Feng ascended to an unimaginable realm. However, in the face of this hazy being, the Emperor was still laughing maniacally. His appearance was too similar to Lu Feng's. You are now the God Slayer Prophet, but now you want to challenge me? Even though this is only a clone of my will, this is the Outland battlefield, and my true body isn't far away. I could descend to my real body at any time. My incarnation can also draw endless power from my main body. Even if your real body descends, what can you do? let alone this clone of the God Slayer prophet. Even if all of you descend, what can you do? Do you think I, the Emperor, will be afraid of you? After the endless space-time, after the primordial immortal demon era, as the greatest emperor, as the only eternal God Emperor in the endless space-time, do you think I, the Emperor, will be afraid of you? After the primordial immortal demon era, in the endless space-time, the only eternal God Emperor. His Emperor was actually the eternal God Emperor. He was actually the true eternal God Emperor, the pinnacle of Psyche Masters, a true God Emperor existence. Perhaps Lu Feng would never have thought that the 5 figures he had seen in the heart of the massacre, the eternal God Emperor that he had been suspicious of, was actually the Emperor. He was actually the Emperor of the 5 great taboo kings that had appeared after the primordial immortal demon era. This was shocking, absolutely shocking. The Emperor stood upright, looking down on all living beings. He looked at the hazy figure that was burning with endless power. He did not say anything because he had already made it clear that he was willing to fight. Chapter 792. Not hesitating to fight, really not hesitating to fight. At this moment, the Emperor had already entered a mysterious realm. Any kind of power was constantly hovering around his body, completely under his control. Dao Songtian and Lu Feng once said that the biggest difference between a psychic and a warrior was that one used the truth of the law of criminal detention as their own power, while the other used the law of criminal detention. In the early stages, when one was weak, borrowing the power of law was obviously stronger than using the law of criminal detention. After all, the law of criminal detention was so terrifying that it was not something that could be casually detained. However, in the later stages, when one was strong enough, the gap between the two would become even more obvious. At this moment, in front of the Emperor, the ancient God Emperor, the Phantom was greatly suppressed. With a gentle wave of his arm, the true essence of endless destruction broke out, connecting countless cracks between heaven and earth, completely annihilating the Emperor's terrifying aura. However, that was all, and it was only limited to the surrounding areas. It was undoubtedly impossible to devour the Emperor's majesty that filled the sky. Looking at the Emperor quietly, the Phantom was silent for a long time before he finally spoke slowly. He will definitely die. This time, I just want to confirm it. Don't tell me that you want to fight against us because of this. Although you are indeed terrifying, don't forget that he was so powerful back then, but in the end, he was annihilated by our hands. Can you be stronger than him? An indescribable brilliance appeared in his eyes, directly shooting out of the void, penetrating the sun, moon, and stars. The scanning of these 2 eyes was enough to annihilate an invincible almighty in an instant, unable to resist. Such a scene was too terrifying, too extreme. This was the pinnacle and extremity of a true, supreme king. Hearing the words of the Phantom, the Emperor did not speak. He only looked at Lu Feng quietly, feeling that the flame of life was almost completely extinguished. In the end, he shook his head gently. He is the taboo king, the Emperor. He is of the same origin as me, an emperor existence. Since ancient times, there have only been 5 taboo kings. However, who would have thought that in this era, there would be 2 taboo kings? Human King Lu Feng, Emperor Lu Feng. The 2 taboo kings are true taboo kings. They are even more monstrous than us taboo kings from the primordial immortal devil era. It's really hard to imagine. Listening to the Emperor talking about these irrelevant things, the shadow just kept silent and didn't want to interrupt. Although the illusory figure that he had summoned was powerful enough to kill anything, it was still very powerful. Although the Emperor had only sent his avatar, once the 2 of them truly engaged in battle, then he had no chance of winning. Even if the Emperor didn't appear in his true form, he could still easily crush this incarnation of his. He knew very well that the Emperor had such strength. Therefore, at this moment, the Emperor was the strong one, and he was the weak one. What he needed to do was to listen quietly and see if there was any way to turn the situation around. However, the real result is that they appeared. They really appeared just like that. This is a type of fate limited by the heavens and earth. These are things that you will never be able to understand. It's something you will never understand. The mysterious figure was silent for a moment. No one was able to tell what he was thinking. Finally, he saw the endless, terrifying avatar of the great emperor in the sky. His voice was heard again. Then what do you mean by this? Are you going to make an enemy out of us for him, even if it's just a corpse? The voice was indifferent and calm. There was no fluctuation of aura in it. However, such an existence was enough to make one tremble in fear. The emperor lowered his head and looked at this tiny existence. He smiled gently. It was a smile filled with endless nobility and glory. Do you still not understand? He is the emperor, a taboo king. Like him, we're also taboo kings. Our glory is shared. Therefore, even if there might be a clash of fate between us, even if there might be an eternal battle between us. However, under such circumstances, we are one. If you want to erase him, it's equivalent to erasing me. Even if it's just a corpse, the glory of a taboo king is not something that you can blaspheme. His voice was filled with an indomitable and terrifying aura. It did not diminish at all. The figure looked at the emperor. After a long silence, he smiled gently. Just for this reason, you won't hesitate to fight with me? The emperor nodded gently. Actually, there are other reasons besides this. However, I can't tell you about them. Therefore, Lu Feng is here. None of you can take him away. Of course, I know that you can even suppress him if you join forces. However, in this foreign battlefield, my existence is much stronger than all of you. As the ancient God Emperor, even if all of you come, what is there for me to be afraid of? The Emperor was incomparably domineering and majestic. Moreover, he was the eternal God Emperor, so the supreme glory and honor he enjoyed was naturally far, far greater than anyone else's. Therefore, he did not care about this at all. He was the same as Lu Feng. Even if he knew that he was going to die, he would not back down. What's more, he was currently in his world and domain. After hearing this, the figure trembled slightly. He could feel the endless determination in the emperor's words. He really wouldn't retreat in the slightest. He would never retreat in the slightest. At this moment, the virtual shadow seemed to have seen Lu Feng's unflinching posture in the face of all these years. He sighed softly. This is the emperor. This is the emperor. Only an emperor could have such determination. He exhaled softly, turned around, and tore open the void. His footsteps had already reached the edge of the void. However, the figure did not leave. He did not turn his head. He just stood quietly at the edge of the crack, as if he was thinking about something. After a long while, his voice slowly rang out. Emperor, do you know, if you are willing to join us and complete everything with us, then I believe in you. We will definitely succeed. The previous era, even the primitive immortal devil era, could not solve the mystery. I believe that as long as you are willing, then we will succeed. Solve the mystery of the primitive immortal devil era. Solve the mystery that the primitive immortal devil era could not solve. This is definitely very tempting. However, after hearing this, the emperor's figure was incomparably calm. There was not even the slightest fluctuation. You will not understand. You will never understand what you are going to do. I won't stop you from doing what you're doing, and I won't comment on it either. Because all of this has nothing to do with me. Because I'm not interested in what you are doing. Hearing the emperor's words, the figure trembled slightly. He suddenly turned around and looked at the emperor's body. Do you already know something? The sentence just now was obviously filled with a strange flavor. Based on this flavor, the figure felt that the emperor should know something. You are one of the 5 great taboo kings left behind in the primitive immortal devil era. You are one of the existences who carried the hope of the primitive immortal devil era. You should know something. You should know something, right? The emperor looked at the figure. His eyes did not tremble at all. He was still so calm. Just like this, after looking at each other for a long time, he finally shook his head gently. Then he nodded. What I know, all of you should know. What I don't know, all of you should know too. Although I am the emperor, I am the hope left behind in the primitive immortal devil era. But all of you should know that we do not have the memories of that era. Everything is just my feeling, a kind of hazy feeling, a kind of a feeling of fear. Hearing this, the figure took a deep breath. In an instant, space-time trembled slightly. As an existence of such a realm, if it wasn't for the fact that his mind was shaken, how could he lose control of his body and power? Just his breath caused space-time to tremble slightly. He was truly astonished. Before him was the Emperor, the only ancient immortal devil era since the end of the primitive immortal devil era. His strength was completely indescribable. Even an ordinary overlord of an epoch would have to face the most terrifying suppression in front of him. It was impossible for an overlord of an era to suppress him. Only the legendary supreme overlords of the human monarch realm could do it. However, such an existence had actually spoken such words, words that made him feel fear. Without a doubt, this made him feel faintly shocked. Will something really happen in the future? After muttering to himself for a while, the figure looked at the Emperor again. This time, the aura around him was even more turbulent and terrifying. In that case, all the more we must succeed. We must succeed. As soon as he finished speaking, the figure stepped into the space-time crack. At this moment, the space-time crack slowly closed again. Just as everything was about to close, the shadow's final words were slowly transmitted over. In the future, if you think you can't bear it, come. Look for us. We can work together. Chapter 793. Gazing at the spot where the figure disappeared, the eternal Emperor's incarnation slowly shrunk and disappeared completely. In an instant, the once luxurious, peerless majesty, the dazzling radiance of the Emperor that shook time and space all vanished. There was only one figure left between heaven and earth, an exceptionally terrifying figure. That was why it was terrifying, not because of how powerful his aura was. All of this was because his current appearance was simply too terrifying. Around his body were virtual chains that connected every corner of his body and every region of his soul. As the first and only eternal great emperor since the immortal and devil age, he had actually been sealed by someone, bound by the chains of karma, fate, reincarnation, and the truth of karma, fate, and reincarnation. No one could imagine what kind of terrifying existence could seal the emperor. He stood quietly in the void and pondered for a moment. Soon, a look of relief appeared on his furrowed brows. He walked gently to Lu Feng's side, his eyes filled with a never-before-seen glow. I've been paying attention to you since a long time ago. Emperor Lu Feng, you are really good. Really, really good. When I saw the path of your rise, it was as if I saw my glorious past. Although we were not on the same battlefield, I saw you. When I saw you, it was as if I was looking at my past self. This time, you did the right thing, the right thing. The Emperor chuckled, his smile filled with an indescribable glow. You are the person they have their eyes on, the person they have placed their hopes on, the person who can protect the future of all living beings. Perhaps in their hearts, your existence is countless times more important than all the living beings of this era combined. You chose to sacrifice yourself for an ant of this era. That is very foolish and irresponsible. But the glow in his eyes had reached a terrifying level. At this moment, the Emperor seemed to have entered a state of madness. His appearance was so similar to Lu Feng's in the past. It could even be said that they were almost identical. But you are the real Emperor. Never compromise, never compromise. In front of his protection, even if it was just a tiny bit, he would never compromise. If you choose to compromise and give up today, then there's no need to talk about the future. If you choose to compromise today, then what right do you have to protect the future? What a joke. What a joke. Those existences believed that they had to learn how to sacrifice for the greater good. But why are we doing this? We, the monarch bloodline, are the strongest existences outside of them. Why should we follow their ideas? Therefore, even if millions of people turn their backs on us, even if billions of people despise us, as long as we persevere in our hearts, we must bravely continue on. Because we are emperors, our will is the greatest will of all. What we believe is the determinative theorem of the heavens and earth. In the next moment, the emperor finally stretched out his arm and waved it gently. Lu Feng, who was quietly floating in the void, was completely lifted up by him. In an instant, he completely disappeared into the endless space-time. The universe was shaken, and all races were stirred. It could be said that the commotion caused by the Battle of the Sovereigns this time had really made countless living beings go completely crazy. This was not madness due to excitement, nor was it madness due to excitement. This was madness due to panic and fear. Emperor Lu Feng, with the strength of one person, suppressed 6 supreme kings, became the final victor of the Battle of the Sovereigns, opened the Emperor realm, and became the supreme figure of the universe. This news should have become the eternal theme, the only theme in the endless space-time in the future. After all, Lu Feng entered the Emperor realm before becoming a god. Moreover, the transformation he completed was truly incomparably shocking. His process was something that could never be replicated. With the strength of one person, facing 6 supreme kings whose realms were far beyond his own, facing these 6 supreme kings, who were enough to be ranked in the top 10 in the endless space-time, he chose to suppress them altogether. It was one time, one person facing 6 supreme kings and a powerful suppression. Such a scene could no longer be described as a miracle. In fact, after his victory, he entered the Emperor realm and became a supreme being of the world. He became an existence that could stand on equal footing with any supreme being. This kind of news should have just been spread. Moreover, it was not just this news. There was also the news that Lu Tao had broken all the shackles in the past and entered the Divine King's forbidden domain. This was enough to shake the universe. After all, Lu Tao was not even 100 years old. One family with 2 supreme kings. This was the Lu family, a sign of the rise of the human race. It could be said that any one of these things was enough to shake the space-time. Lu Feng suppressed 6 supreme kings and rushed into the Emperor realm. He killed a god and became a king, broke into the Divine King's forbidden domain. The Divine King, calming chaos, did not truly die. He borrowed the body of his former disciple, heavenly god Jialan, to become the second-level Divine King's Overlord of Time. The leader of the Alchemist Alliance, Saint Alchemist Rome of the 3 Sacred Path Alchemists, was actually a former domain Saint Alchemist and had even entered the Celestial Emperor's domain. These 4 things, any one of them, shocked countless people to the point of madness. However, compared to the last thing, all of this was nothing. God Punisher officially appeared and stood in front of everyone. God Punisher's strength had even surpassed the limit of the universe's peak overlords' combined strength. In the War of the Supreme Kings, hundreds of billions of living beings were wiped out by God Punisher. These hundreds of billions of living beings were the pinnacle figures of their respective races. They either had noble statuses, terrifying strength, or peerless talent. The loss of any one of them would make the entire race concerned. However, this time, hundreds of billions of living beings were lost. This was definitely an unbearable pain. However, in the shocking battle that followed, God Punisher suffered the vengeance he deserved. The monarch entered the imperial Tao domain and suppressed the God Slayer, Supreme God King. The Killer King entered the Divine King's forbidden domain and suppressed the Divine King. The domain Saint Alchemist was powerful and terrifying. With the power of a peerless celestial emperor, he suppressed the Divine King. In the other few battles, both sides suffered heavy losses and separated. None of them had died. However, following that, the truly shocking news appeared. The Chaos Stabilizer Divine King has undergone a complete transformation and completed a terrifying feat. He suppressed the Overlord of Time. This was a piece of news that should excite countless living beings. After all, the Chaos Stabilizer Divine King had killed the Overlord of Time. This was enough to make countless living beings rejoice. However, when the second piece of news appeared, the excited living beings all froze. All of them were dumbfounded. The Emperor went berserk. He summoned 1,000,000 worlds and transformed into 1,000,000 immortals. He used an invincible immortal technique and sacrificed his life to suppress the Overlord of time. The Emperor life, death, the Emperor life. No one could have imagined that Lu Feng had suppressed the Overlord of time. However, even if they couldn't imagine it, they could accept it. After all, the Emperor had always been synonymous with miracles and miracles. Although it was beyond the limits of their imagination, it was still acceptable for him to suppress the Overlord of time. However, no one could accept the last 4 words. The Emperor life, the Emperor died just like that. The Emperor died just like that. Although it had only been 2 years since Lu Feng's true debut. In those 2 years, the entire universe revolved around him. Because of his appearance, the entire era was constantly in an uproar. Although it had only been 2 years, only 2 years, Lu Feng had already established an eternal faith in the hearts of countless living beings. He had become an existence that the younger generation of the human race, and even the other races, believed in with fervor. Unlike his father, who killed a god, he was the nightmare of millions of young people of that generation. Lu Feng's existence was their faith. Countless young people crazily believed in him. But now, Lu Feng had fallen. Their faith had crumbled. How could they accept such a scene? How could they accept it in the highest meeting hall of the Federation? More than 5,000 existences stood quietly. They had all retracted their power and wills. These 5,000 existences were all watching and waiting quietly. They were the Federation, the last hope of the entire human race. They were the final foundation of the human race. At this moment, all the human race that could appear had all appeared. Even the many human beings who were stationed in the 4 battlefields, the numerous peak experts of the human race in the countless secret realms, and the human warriors who had gone to other realms to search for new territories for the human race had all returned. They had all returned here to wait for the final decision of the human race. These 5,000 existences were not ordinary living beings. They were the most powerful beings of the human race. They were all virtual king almighties. 5,000 virtual king almighties. The foundation of the human race was incomparable to any other peak overlord race. No other race could be trusted. This was the foundation of the human race. The foundation of the human race's true invincibility. The 5,000 virtual king almighties did not say a word. They were all quietly waiting, watching the figures sitting quietly on the high platform in front of them. This time, the final foundation of the human race was completely shaken. The entire Lu family, the entire Yuyo clan, the entire bloodline of the Grand Emperor, and all the hidden powers of the grand ancestors of the entire human race walked out of the stage and gathered here. The Lu clan's grand ancestor, the second patriarch, and the other 2 patriarchs, the Yuyo and Lin Huang from the Yuyo clan, and the 10 patriarchs from the other 6 godly monarch clans. A total of 40 invincible almighties were waiting quietly. Although they were invincible almighties, they were the most honorable peak existences in the entire world. However, here, they were just ordinary warriors who could only wait for the final result. They had no right to speak. All the decisions would depend on the extreme Tao figure in front of them. The Lu family's Juyin King, Tianjin King, and Heavenly King were the 3 sovereigns of the heretic Tao. Together with the Lu family's godslayer Lu Tao, although he was only of virtual king level, one almighty, his combat strength was in the forbidden mythological realm. In the eyes of many living beings, he was undoubtedly a supreme being. The Federation's Radiant King and World Regret King, the 2 sovereigns of the heretic Tao, were silent. They were the last of the Federation's strength. The Capital University's 2 quasi-heavenly emperor-level sovereigns of the heretic Tao, together with the realm's sacred elixir master, the 3 divine king sovereigns, were also quietly looking at each other and communicating telepathically. Now, there were a total of 9 sovereigns or heavenly emperors. In terms of combat strength, they were equivalent to the 9 divine king sovereigns. Apart from these 9 sovereigns, the one that everyone looked up to the most was the figure at the center of everything. The divine king stabilizing chaos. In the eyes of Lu Feng, he was once a heaven-slaughtering god. Now he was truly the divine king stabilizing chaos. The power that the human race had gathered at this moment was enough to sweep away the entire galaxy of the universe in the past. This kind of power was truly glorious in this era. However, at this moment, these people were endlessly solemn. Their eyes were solemn before a great battle. However, there was also a deep sadness in the eyes of some existences. Chapter 794. Sweeping his gaze over everyone present, God King Placid Chaos slowly rose to his feet. There was a faint sadness in his eyes, a mixture of helplessness and indescribable pain. Once upon a time, he had a disciple who made him proud. His existence was indeed like that. At that time, celestial goddess Jialan could truly be described as brilliant and magnificent. Apart from a heaven-defying monster like Lu Feng, a taboo king like him could be considered the most invincible existence in the boundless time and space. Even the current crown prince was only on par with him. However, it was precisely this arrogant disciple who had first suffered endless injuries, and then just after completing a world-shocking transformation, shattering the taboo and entering the God King realm, that disciple had fallen into the Yellow Springs because of him. The fall of celestial god Jialan was the greatest sorrow of the chaos, calming divine king's life. Finally, when he walked out of endless pain, he encountered a disciple once again, a disciple who made his heart tremble and his soul tremble. Lu Feng back then really couldn't be considered outstanding. At most, he was a monster at the level of the Emperor of Massacre. However, the incomparably astounding willpower on his body moved godly King Placid Chaos. Finally, he appeared once again and started to truly guide Lu Feng. He started to treat Lu Feng as a second disciple and taught him with great care. Lu Feng's performance after that was a pleasant surprise to him and even astonished him. Along the way, from the level of the King of Massacre, in a short period of time, he broke through countless shackles and became the King of Massacre, a supreme king. He even completed a heaven-defying transformation and became the King of Taboo, who was comparable to the human king. However, that wasn't the end. The crazy Lu Feng wasn't done yet, because he still had something even crazier to do. In the short period of time that followed, he began a terrifying journey that he had never experienced before. Along the way, no matter who his opponent was, he would shatter them, completely shatter them. Finally, he succeeded. Everything he did surpassed the human monarchs and became the #1 person in the boundless time and space, even including the primordial immortal devil era. Wang Zhan's final battle arrived. He was a heaven-defying monster and had a shocking breakthrough. At that time, even though he already knew Lu Feng very well, when he said that he wanted to challenge the 6 supreme monarchs alone, even Tu Tianxin, who was hidden outside the boundless time and space, couldn't help but feel shocked and excited. Regardless of whether Lu Feng succeeded or not, his domineering attitude alone was something that no one could compare to. He was truly proud of Lu Feng, proud of him, but the disciple that he was so proud of had fallen once again. He had fallen, he had really fallen. Although he didn't believe it, when he saw the collision that destroyed the entire medicine god domain and heard Lu Tao's description, the Divine King was sure that Lu Feng had really fallen. If he had relied on the existence of the sky path diagram, he would have been able to deduce Lu Feng's existence. However, because Lu Feng's fate had been noble, even the human monarchs had participated in the condensation of the sky path diagram. Since the diagram of the heavenly Tao had already lost its effect and Lu Tao had already described the situation, Divine King Placid Chaos could no longer think of anything else based on what he had seen. He took a deep breath and retracted all of his previous emotions. He knew that now wasn't the time to grieve. Now, the God Punisher had truly started to step out of the limelight. Such a terrifying force was an existence that could make the entire universe tremble. If they really went all out, then the few of them wouldn't be a match for them. Therefore, the most important thing right now was how to deal with the God Punisher. The Divine King fell silent for a moment as he looked at the 9 Supremes before him. Then he said, "The fall of the monarch this time is the greatest sorrow of the human race. However, the most important thing right now isn't to grieve over this matter. We still have other things to face." The 9 Supremes nodded their heads gently. At the moment, even Lu Tao didn't reveal any emotions. He had finally chosen to be solemn. Although he was sad, he also understood that now wasn't the time to grieve. Now was the time to protect. The God Punisher's foundation is extremely terrifying. It could even be said to be extreme. Based on what the Sacred Alchemy Masters and the Battle God Primogenitor have investigated over the years, I'm afraid that there are at least 7 temporal overlords in their organization. 7 temporal overlords. In an instant, everyone's eyes were filled with an indescribable emotion. This was shock complete and utter shock. One must know that even at the peak of this era, there had never been more than 5 temporal overlords that existed at the same time. However, a mere God Punisher organization actually had 7 temporal overlords. Moreover, this was only the Divine King's guess. The monarch and I each killed one of the 2 temporal overlords. At the mention of the monarch, the Divine King's eyes flashed with a strange mix of emotions. Right now, they have at least 5 temporal overlords left. As for the Divine King, I'm afraid there are no less than 50 of them left. There are no less than 50 Divine King Supremes. Hiss! At this moment, it wasn't just the Supremes. Even the 40 unparalleled Almighties and 5,000 Almighties below couldn't help but suck in a deep breath of cold air. There were no less than 50 Divine King Supremes. This was definitely a number that could easily sweep through the universe. If this was really the case, then even if the entire human race relied on the resources left behind by the Divine King, they probably wouldn't be able to contend against God Punisher. Could it be that they really had to despair and submit to God Punisher? Many existences were speechless and silent. However, the thing that shocked them and made them feel despair wasn't over. It still wasn't over, because in the next moment, the Divine King said something that made them feel even more despair. In God Punisher, the true ruler isn't the temporal overlords. It's the prophet, an existence known as the prophet. He's very terrifying. In fact, he's already surpassed the limits of terror. According to the news the monarch received at the last moment, this existence known as the prophet is incomparably mysterious and unparalleled. He once suppressed the internal turmoil of God Punisher. At that time, he easily suppressed several temporal overlords. If the previous news made them suck in a breath of cold air, then after hearing this, many existences were dumbfounded, completely dumbfounded. Although it was said that God Punisher had at least 5 temporal overlords and 50 Divine King, in the eyes of the human race's experts, none of this was a problem. Because they had the Divine King, the diagram of the heavenly Tao, and many other shocking treasures left behind by the Divine King. If they relied on these things to protect themselves, there was a certain possibility. However, there was one thing they were afraid of, and that was the pinnacle experts. Because the existence of the pinnacle experts wasn't something that could be obstructed or resisted by anything. In front of them, everything was illusory. For example, the Divine King had entered a terrifying realm after going through a life and death situation. His strength was close to that of a perfected temporal overlord. Once he was shaken and completely crazy, not to mention a few Divine King, even a dozen Divine King wouldn't be his match. They were far from being his match. This was the terror of the pinnacle experts. Many existences weren't afraid of God Punisher having 5 temporal overlords and 50 Divine King. However, they were afraid of the pinnacle experts of God Punisher. Clearly, this was the case with the existence of the prophet. To be able to easily suppress several temporal overlords at the same time, such a power of power was probably at the perfected temporal overlord realm. Such an existence was even stronger than the Divine King. Once the battle started, everyone really didn't know what to do. The Divine King sighed softly while looking at the indescribable expressions on everyone's faces. He knew that saying this would certainly deal a heavy blow to the confidence of many existences. However, he had no choice but to do so. If they were to find out about this in the future, then it wouldn't be a blow, but a collapse instead. He gently exhaled, and a mysterious power was born. It fluctuated in all directions and spread out, completely waking everyone up from their shock. In an instant, the Divine King's gaze was shaken. It shot into the hearts of all existences, causing them to gradually recover from that extremely terrifying thought. At this moment, the Divine King's voice slowly rang out. Could it be that you're afraid just because of this? Are all of you really that scared? The Divine King's voice also rang out in the depths of their hearts, causing their souls to tremble. Looking at them, the Divine King's eyes were filled with countless emotions. Are all of you really that weak? Are you really that ignorant? Many existences were silent. They were silent. They couldn't help but be silent. Some things, sometimes, couldn't be accomplished by perseverance or courage. Looking at them, God King Placid Chaos's voice rang out once more. Do you still remember the Emperor? His voice wasn't loud, but when these words were spoken, it caused all existences' souls to tremble. They were truly at a loss. Do you still remember the Emperor? The Emperor? How could they not remember? Although the Emperor had already fallen, his existence was incomparable to anything else. He had just fallen, but even if he had fallen for 1,000 years, 10,000 years, or 100 million years, the Emperor's existence in their hearts would never wither. So how could they possibly forget? At this moment, the Divine King's simple words had deeply wounded the depths of their souls. Finally, these existences were completely shaken. They naturally understood why the Divine King had called out Lu Feng's title. Do you still remember the Emperor? Since you remember the Emperor, then do you still remember the Emperor's deeds? Since his debut, the Emperor has been the genius of the Lu family, the one we've protected. But until now, he has experienced so many life and death tribulations and sunk into so many dangerous eras. When has he ever truly relied on the help of others? Life and death? That's true life and death. It's 100 million times more difficult than the life and death we've faced. But when has he ever retreated? When has he ever given up? When has he ever been afraid? Don't say that you're not the Emperor. Don't say that you can't compare to the Emperor. Indeed, your aptitudes are far from the Emperor's. You don't even have the qualifications to see his back. But as the Emperor's ancestors, could it be that you're not even as courageous as the Emperor? If that's really the case, then the Divine King swept his gaze over them. His eyes were filled with an indescribable brilliance. Then you don't deserve to be part of the human race. You don't deserve to be part of the same race as the Emperor Lu Feng. Chapter 795. All of you are not worthy of being part of the same race as the Emperor. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone's expression changed drastically. However, they could not refute anything, because Lu Feng's existence was truly qualified to educate them and qualified to make them feel ashamed. From the beginning to the end, Lu Feng had faced all his opponents alone. No matter how powerful his opponents were, how strong their backgrounds were, or how talented they were, Lu Feng had never once retreated. In terms of age, Lu Feng's existence was much younger than these people in front of them. In fact, the existences here were Lu Feng's ancestors. However, some things could not be determined by age. For example, Lu Feng had done what they could not do. This was the thing that made them feel ashamed. Finally, as one of the ancestors sighed, more and more virtual King Almighties raised their heads. At this moment, there was not much turbulence in their eyes. There was no longer any uneasiness in them. There was only a kind of indifference, an indescribable indifference. That's right. Since our descendants can do it, why can't we do it? Although we are not as talented as the Emperor, can we not even compare to him in the subjective aspect of courage? Are we really that bad? Can we admit that we are cowards? His voice grew louder and louder, and at the last moment, it even faintly sounded like a roar. At this moment, many existences were completely shaken. They finally stopped hesitating and retreating. It's just death, it's just death. We have already gone through half of the journey in our lives. Our qualifications are limited, and our power limit has made us understand that this is the end of our lives. Therefore, it's impossible for us to have any big breakthroughs in the future. This was a kind of helpless bitterness. Although their current cultivation was amazing, and they had all reached the level of almighties, peerless almighties, and invincible almighties, this was already their limit. They really could not take the next step, and they really could not enter into a more powerful realm. Being unable to improve represents the limit of our lives in this life. That's it. Since their lives were limited, what was there for them to be afraid of? Since there was no so-called hope for the future, the greatest meaning of their existence now was to protect. Therefore, what were they afraid of? The 5,000 virtual kings were not idiots. Those who were able to reach their current level belonged to the monstrous and peak geniuses of their era. Their lives were full of ups and downs, or else it was impossible for them to reach the level of the virtual king almighties. After experiencing so much, they were naturally open-minded. They naturally understood what was going on. Just now, he was just stunned by the 3 terrifying pieces of news. Now, they were finally able to let go of everything. Therefore, they were no longer a loss. Seeing everyone's expressions, godly King Placid Chaos revealed a gratified look in his eyes. At this moment, he really sighed, endlessly sighed. Although Lu Feng had died, his existence had become a kind of faith. This kind of faith did not only belong to the younger generation, but also to the previous generation, the generation before that, and even all the generations before that. It had already started to spread, and it had already started to be established. Looking at the slightly excited virtual king almighties, the divine king of chaos sighed imperceptibly. Lu Feng, if you don't, then how great would that be? The news that God Punisher was about to appear shook the entire universe. It could be said that the peak Overlord races were extremely frightened at this moment. After all, even a strong human race had no way of facing God Punisher directly, and it was even more impossible for the weaker races to do so. In just a few short days, the entire universe was filled with shocking news. The Master God Alliance announced that they would strengthen their cooperation and build cross-space-time teleportation arrays in their respective important regions. A cross-space-time teleportation array was a terrifying array that could teleport through space-time. In the universe, as long as there was enough power, one could definitely travel through space-time in an extremely short period of time. In theory, if there was enough power, it wouldn't be a problem to directly connect the 2 ends of the universe. Of course, this was only in theory. After all, to connect the 2 ends of the universe, the amount of power required would definitely make the universe look askance. The 3 pinnacle overlords of the Overgods Alliance and the dozens of pinnacle first-rate clans and their forces had also set up such a space-time teleportation formation. As for the ordinary pinnacle clans, they were all mobilized and moved into the higher clans affiliated to them. Without a doubt, the Master God's train of thought gave the other factions the same idea. Soon, the gods and the Master God Alliance did the same and made the same arrangements. Just like that, the 4 great factions completed their complete integration and really formed the 4 great factions of the universe. In the desolate space-time, there was no beginning or end, no edge or corner, no beginning or end. This was a truly dead and empty space-time. Nothing could be felt here, not even the power of the laws and so on. There was no feeling at all. This place was truly an extremely barren world. However, if one really took a closer look, they would discover that this desolate world wasn't really empty. This was because in the deepest part of the endless entanglement, there was an existence, a real existence. That was countless chains that were almost completely transparent and didn't seem to have any form. One section was in the deepest part of the endless space, while the other end seemed to be connected to some unknown haze and was broken at the edge of space-time, completely disappearing. This scene was filled with an indescribable sense of strangeness. However, this situation didn't last for long because in the next moment, a crack suddenly appeared in the space where the chain disappeared. It was a terrifying crack. When the crack was opened to its largest extent, a figure slowly walked out from it. The Emperor, the one who had returned, was the Emperor. The starting point of the countless chains was this barren space, and the end point was above the Emperor's body. Such a scene was truly horrifying and unbelievable. However, the Emperor didn't seem to see anything. He just took a step forward and landed in the void. Then, just as the space-time crack behind him was about to close, a second figure appeared. However, his existence seemed to have completely sunk into oblivion. There was no sign of life in him. He was lying in the void, his body covered in indescribable injuries. His expression was completely empty. There was no feeling of life surging within him. At the moment, Lu Feng really seemed like he was dead. He was completely dead. He casually placed Lu Feng in the void and let him continue floating. The Emperor's eyes were filled with an indescribable emotion. He stared at Lu Feng for a long time before he finally exhaled softly. Lu Feng, you could be considered a true apex existence. Since ancient times, even during the primordial immortal demon era, no one has been able to kill a temporal overlord before reaching the godly spirit realm like you. Although you have paid a huge price, being able to experience such a battle will bring you endless benefits in the future. This time, I can only help you this much. I hope that it won't be long before we meet again. I hope that when that time comes, you and I will be able to fight to our heart's content. Let me see who is the one and only strongest emperor in this world. Who is the one and only emperor? Once again, he gently waved his arm and opened a crack in the void. From the void, he hesitated for a moment before solemnly taking out something. In an instant, it was really just an instant. The moment that thing was taken out from the crack in the void, this barren world seemed to be filled with countless fluctuations of life in an instant. Without a doubt, this was absolutely shocking. This was because this desolate space-time was truly desolate. There was nothing here, not even laws or theorems. Even if there was something with life aura, it would at most possess its own life aura and would not infect its surroundings. However, when that thing was taken out of the crack in space and time by the Emperor, the entire desolate space seemed to be completely transformed. Shocking, shocking, terrifying, terrifying. There was a strange glint in the Emperor's eyes as he looked at the thing in his hand. He actually hesitated for a moment as he looked at it. However, in the end, he still tossed it slowly towards Lu Feng. This is the last grade 12 Ultimate King Pill in history. I really can't bear to part with it. However, in order to save your life, this is the only thing I can do. Lu Feng, this is all I can do. This is all I can do. I hope that you will be able to live up to the peerless power of the Emperor's bloodline. A grade 12 Ultimate King Pill. In the current era, a grade 9 Divine Pill was something that even the Divine King would go crazy over. As for the grade 10 Heaven Elixir Pill, it was only recorded in ancient legends. However, the Emperor had taken out a grade 12 Ultimate King Pill. This was already indescribable. A grade 12 Ultimate King Pill is already enough for your injuries. Fortunately, you have yet to reach the godly spirit realm. If you had broken countless shackles while in the godly spirit realm and entered the Emperor's domain and suffered serious injuries, I'm afraid that no one would be able to save you unless he returned from the cycle of reincarnation. After muttering to himself, the Emperor sighed softly. A grade 12 Ultimate King Pill was something that could only be refined by a supreme ruler. It was an astonishing pill created using the essence of heaven and earth, the condensation of time, and the foundation of space and time. As far as he could remember, even during the Immortal Devil era, there were only 3 Ultimate King Pills. These 3 Ultimate King Pills were all world-shaking existences, and they were all condensed by the great and eternal him. Apart from him, no one else could create a grade 12 Ultimate King Pill. Chapter 796. In the Emperor's memory, the other two ultimate king pills had already been used. This was the true last one. Although he was reluctant, he still took out the ultimate king pill. To the Emperor, Lu Feng's existence was far from what the ultimate king pill could compare to. The ultimate king pill's existence was similar to a cluster of sparkling runes. What it contained was the truth of heaven and earth. It was an indescribably peculiar feeling. It quietly existed and carefully looked at. There was really too much to see. One could see the cycle of reincarnation, see the resplendence of the world, see the vastness of a universe. This didn't seem like a pill, but a vast world that had refined the universe. Such a terrifying scene was unimaginable to anyone. The ultimate king pill appeared and quietly floated in front of Lu Feng. In the next moment, its power began to be stimulated. Endless profound laws, power, and truth appeared and covered Lu Feng's body. The ultimate king pill is a sacred object that has refined the sun, moon, heaven, and earth. This time, the benefits you have obtained are really too great. Even if an ordinary person without any aptitude used the ultimate king pill, they would be transformed into a peak supreme king. They would even be infinitely close to becoming a taboo king. You're a taboo king. I really don't know how terrifying you will be after using it. At this moment, the Emperor's eyes were filled with anticipation. That kind of expression was completely indescribable. He knew that if Lu Feng used the ultimate king pill, he would undergo the most thorough transformation and become an indescribable existence. Looking at the endless space-time, there was simply no monstrous genius that could compare to him. Gently exhaling, the Emperor watched as the ultimate king pill continuously transformed Lu Feng's body and soul. At this moment, the Emperor's eyes were filled with anticipation. The ultimate king pill's power finally bloomed and completely entered Lu Feng's body. At this moment, in this barren world, in this space without any existence, an indescribably shocking power appeared. It was a fusion of too many complex powers. All of them tumbled, covered, and entered Lu Feng's body. Countless profound mysteries of power frantically repaired all the damaged parts of Lu Feng's body. Faintly, the incomparably terrifying, mysterious powers in the void were born. They condensed and began to sink into the surface of Lu Feng's body. At this moment, a soul seemed to have appeared in Lu Feng's body. That was Lu Feng's soul. At this moment, Lu Feng's soul was in an incomparably miserable state. Compared to his body, the damage to his soul was even more indescribable. The originally substantial soul body was now transparent. In many parts of Lu Feng's body, there were even holes. In those places, nothing could be seen. Seeing this scene, even a terrifying and mighty existence like the Emperor had an indescribable turbulence in his eyes. He really did not expect that Lu Feng would be so severely injured. Even if it was him, he would have been completely annihilated under such a heavy injury. However, Lu Feng was still able to use such a powerful power at the end to destroy an overlord of time. This was truly an endless amount of astonishment. 1 billion mortal worlds, 1 billion immortals. In the memories of the primitive immortal devil era, I have never heard of such an invincible immortal technique. What kind of existence was condensed into this? Could it be that this is the ultimate unique skill that he created? The Emperor looked at Lu Feng, who was constantly transforming in front of him. Finally, he left his mind and began to slowly ponder. 1 billion mortal worlds, 1 billion immortals. It seems that the ultimate state should be to summon 1 billion worlds and 1 billion immortals. It's hard to imagine that just 1 million immortals and 1 million worlds already has such a vast amount of power. If it really enters the ultimate state, then I'm afraid that in the endless space and time, there is no existence that can resist. According to normal calculations, not to mention 100 million mortal worlds, even 10 million mortal worlds, or 10 million immortals alone, the ultimate power should be enough to collapse the entire outer region battlefield. It's really hard to imagine how such an invincible immortal technique could be born. The outer region battlefield was also known as a small universe. It was far from being comparable to the original universe. However, in terms of area, it was absolutely terrifying. The Emperor could feel that if Lu Feng could really condense 10 million worlds or 10 million immortals, then there was no need to fuse them. Just one of them alone would be enough to completely collapse the entire outer region battlefield, which was known as a small universe. After taking a deep breath, he finally stopped thinking about it. His gaze was still focused on Lu Feng. However, the moment the Emperor saw it, he was stunned once again. What is going on? He frowned slightly, and there was a confused look on his face. He saw it. Logically speaking, the ultimate power of the Emperor Pill should be to provide some power. It should be two extreme powers, one to repair the body and the other to repair the soul. In theory, the absorption speed of the body and the soul should be the same. However, at this moment, there was an obvious difference. Originally, there should be a difference. After all, his soul and body practice two different cultivation methods. Although I don't know what his body's cultivation method is, his soul is practicing the supreme cultivation method of our monarch bloodline, the primordial scripture. The primordial scripture is the strongest cultivation method of our monarch bloodline. It's the true ultimate cultivation method of the monarch bloodline. It was an invincible existence in the ancient immortal devil era. The speed at which it absorbs energy should be the fastest and the most powerful. But now, the absorption speed of the body was not inferior to the soul at all. In fact, it seemed to be slightly suppressing the soul. And it was this scene that left the Emperor speechless. The Primordial Sutra, the strongest technique of the Emperor bloodline in the immortal devil era, the only ultimate technique of the Emperor bloodline, can't compare to his physical technique. Lu Feng, what kind of shocking secret does he contain? At this moment, even the Emperor was shocked. He also understood that Lu Feng's existence must contain a great secret. First, it was the 1 billion immortals in the mortal world. Now it was this terrifying physical technique. He really didn't know what Lu Feng had experienced. When they talked to me about Lu Feng, they were vague. Vaguely, they seemed to say that Lu Feng was related to him. However, I don't know how much they are related. Now, it seems that they are related. However, the relationship shouldn't be that big. Lu Feng's secret was very different from his. There were many things that they couldn't coexist. Therefore, there might be a relationship between them, but it shouldn't be that big. After thinking through this, the Emperor was silent and looked at Lu Feng quietly. Lu Feng's recovery took a lot of time. According to the Emperor's estimation, Lu Feng used at least a month to completely absorb the energy of the final Emperor pill. Absorbing a single pill in a month's time was something that had never happened before. However, the Emperor was still shocked by this speed. It wasn't because it was slow, but because it was too fast. According to his estimation, Lu Feng would need at least 3 months to half a year to complete it. But now, it was completed in a month's time. In his opinion, this speed was simply heaven-defying. I don't know what kind of cultivation technique Lu Feng's physical body has cultivated, but the primordial sutra that his soul cultivates is the true inheritance of the Emperor's bloodline, the ultimate law of the Emperor. According to that speed, it shouldn't be so shocking. The speed at which his soul absorbs energy is directly proportional to the size of the god's domain. My calculations are based on the size of a normal god's domain. If I calculate it this way, his god's domain is 3 to 6 times bigger than a normal god's domain. This Lu Feng is really terrifying. At this moment, even the Emperor had to admit that Lu Feng was terrifying. There was no doubt that such a scene had never happened before. Finally, after sensing that Lu Feng was completely recovered, the Emperor didn't wait any longer. He knew that Lu Feng wouldn't be able to wake up without a period of time. Furthermore, he couldn't wait for Lu Feng to wake up. Therefore, he decided to send Lu Feng over directly. He hesitated for a moment, as if he had thought of something. The Emperor didn't hesitate any longer. In the next instant, he finally walked out of the endless world of chains. With a single step, he carried Lu Feng's body and seemed to pass through billions of space-time. When he stopped again, he was already in front of an area that looked like a black hole. Everything in the surroundings no longer existed. A terrifying pulling force kept coming, crazily pulling everything inwards. This wasn't an existence similar to a black hole at all. Such a crazy pulling force undoubtedly proved that this was really a black hole. It was really the black hole that could devour everything in the legends. Looking at the black hole in front of him, the Emperor's eyes flashed with a shocking light. In just an instant, it actually penetrated the layers of fog and shattered the endless pressure. This was the Emperor's terrifying ability. This was the Emperor's ultimate power. With just his eyes, he could easily split the black hole that could even devour space-time and annihilate the power of time into two halves. The black hole that was split apart wasn't completely destroyed. Instead, there was a feeling of endless mystery in the area where it was split apart. It was a kind of space-time link, a kind of connection between eras. This was actually an entrance, a real space transfer array. No one would have thought that there was such a thing hidden in the depths of this black hole. Looking at the deep space-time tunnel, the Emperor's eyes flashed with a complicated expression. It was a kind of nostalgia, a kind of attachment, a kind of memory, and a kind of contemplation. After a long time, all these expressions disappeared and were replaced by a kind of unswerving determination. Looking at Lu Feng, who was still unconscious in front of him, the Emperor sighed softly. Lu Feng, to be honest, I really admire you. You've never traveled through eras, nor have you plundered the fate of those eras. You were just born in such an ordinary era. But your achievements are something that even I can't catch up to. If someone like you enters this place and is given time, I really can't imagine what kind of level you can reach in the future. After sighing softly, he didn't say anything else. The Emperor's eyes had already recovered their former tranquility. Finally, he stretched out his arm and gently waved it. In the next moment, Lu Feng's body began to move. Finally, he completely entered the space-time crack. Lu Feng didn't understand. He probably didn't expect that the location that the mysterious existence in the ruins told him was actually the place with the blood of the human king, the place where the heaven-forbidden king was heavily injured. And the one guarding this place was actually the Emperor. Unknowingly, when he knew that he was going to die, he entered the place he had been looking forward to for a long time. Chapter 797. Lu Feng heaved a long sigh as he looked at the things around him and waved the knife in his hand. His eyes were filled with bitterness. He had been doing this job for almost a month now. For an entire month, he had been using this sharp knife to chop the firewood. Of course, according to what Lu Feng knew, these were not simple firewood. They were very noble and belonged to a kind of rare wood. If placed in the original space-time, they would be at least a divine object of the third grade. Chopping them into pieces was not as simple as simply boiling water and vegetables. After all, no matter how terrifying this place was and how rich the resources were, it was impossible to use third-grade divine objects to cook. The biggest need for chopping them up was to refine elixirs. Finally, Lu Feng threw the knife aside and straightened his body. A satisfied smile appeared on Lu Feng's face as he sensed the gradually recovering power in his body. It has been a whole month. I have finally started to slowly recover. Based on this speed, I should be able to recover in 2 more months. I wonder what level I will be able to reach after this. The smile on his face widened. Lu Feng could feel that the benefits he had gained this time could not be described with the word shocking. He had entered the Divine King's forbidden territory and obliterated a Divine King and a temporal overlord. This kind of shocking battle and extreme tempering had allowed his great demon true body to enter an unimaginable realm. Coupled with the use of the 1 billion mortal worlds and 1 billion immortals, his comprehension of anything was exceptionally terrifying. It could be said that although his understanding of many things could not be compared to that of the Divine King, It was more terrifying than that of an ordinary sky celestial or even the virtual king. Lu Feng could also sense that after he woke up, his soul and body seemed to have received some heaven-defying benefits. They had already completed the absorption and were slowly transforming and fusing together. This kind of benefit was absolutely shocking and even world-defying. Even though he was usually very confident in his control and had a very deep understanding, at this moment, he actually didn't know what level he could reach after 2 months. After slowly putting away his things and tidying them up, Lu Feng pushed open the door and walked out. Lu Feng sighed softly as he looked at the shining sun outside the door. In his mind, he recalled the time when he had just woken up. "You are finally awake." After a slight struggle, Lu Feng slowly sat up on the bed. As he looked at everything around him, his eyes glowed with an incomparably strange radiance. After experiencing so much, facing so many life or death situations, his heart had already become incomparably hard. The 9-layer illusion on the ancient Feng clan's altar had allowed him to experience far too much. Therefore, he was at a loss at this moment. He forcibly propped himself up and closed his eyes to sense his surroundings. In the next moment, when he opened his eyes, a hint of understanding had already appeared in his eyes. This understanding was not because he knew where this place was. It was because Lu Feng had confirmed one thing. This place really wasn't an illusion, but a place that truly existed. "What's going on? You haven't recovered yet. Why did you sit up on your own? Lie down first. Otherwise, it will definitely leave a root of illness. You have to know that we are not like those exalted immortals who can fly around and be immune to all diseases." Hearing this kind voice, Lu Feng smiled faintly, but did not say anything. He closed his eyes again, but a moment later, he opened them abruptly. This time, Lu Feng's eyes were intertwined with countless complicated emotions. Naturally, he could feel everything in his body clearly. And it was precisely because he felt it too clearly that he felt unusually complicated at this moment. Although he did not know why, Lu Feng could feel that he had really recovered. No, it could not be said that he had recovered. It should be said that he had become even more terrifying. The current him was really terrifying to an extreme extent. During this period of time, when he thought he had died, he seemed to have obtained some heaven-defying benefits. His soul and physical body had undergone an indescribable and shocking change. The extent of his strength was far beyond his imagination. However, it seemed that because he had transformed too much at once, he was simply unable to control it at this time. His soul and physical body were also unusually disharmonious, so he could not use any power at all. Of course, although he could not use any power, it would be very ridiculous to say that he did not have any strength now. Lu Feng understood that before he completely merged and recovered, although he might not have the terrifying power that was comparable to that of a divine god, it was not something that ordinary gods, or even true gods, could compare to. Lu Feng was confident that just by relying on his current physical body and his fighting skills, he would be able to easily suppress an ordinary high-level true god. It should be known that in the past, if he only relied on his physical body, even an ordinary low-level true god would not be able to contend against him, let alone a high-level true god. But now, after breaking through, he had such power. This was undoubtedly shocking. Moreover, Lu Feng was even more aware of one thing, and that was that his terror was far from just this. After everything was completed, after he could completely utilize the mysteries of his physical body, Lu Feng was even confident that he could rely on his physical body to contend against any divine god. Such a scene made even Lu Feng feel terrified. All this was good. However, according to Lu Feng's estimation, he would need a lot of time if he wanted to reach the realm of complete fusion. At the very least, he would need 3 or 4 months to do so. He did not know what dangers there would be in this brand new place. Therefore, Lu Feng had already decided to keep a low profile for 3 or 4 months. After 3 months, when he had recovered to his peak power, he would think of a way to leave this place. He had to leave. No matter how good this place was, he still had to leave. After all, The appearance of Godslayer in his original world had really made him unable to let go of anything. Lu Feng exhaled softly and finally looked at the owner of the voice that had spoken just now. It was an old man, an extremely ordinary old man. Of course, Lu Feng could sense that he was really very ordinary and did not hide anything. After all, although he could not use his peak power or even the slightest bit of the mysteries, his eyesight had not disappeared. In Lu Feng's perception, this old man was really an extremely ordinary existence. Of course, unless his strength exceeded the range of Lu Feng's perception and he could not even faintly sense him, he definitely could not exceed Lu Feng's perception. If he wanted to reach a level where Lu Feng could not sense him at all, he would need to at least reach the king realm. Lu Feng did not believe that a virtual king could be so ordinary. As he looked at the old man, Lu Feng hesitated for a bit before opening his mouth and asking, "Old?" As soon as he opened his mouth, Lu Feng's expression changed slightly. At this moment, he realized that there was a problem that he had not noticed before. And that was at this very moment. He actually spoke so casually. Speaking was nothing. It was very normal. However, the problem was that Lu Feng's words were not his usual language at all. He was using another language to speak naturally. At this moment, he also realized that it was not only the words he spoke, but also the words he heard. However, in his perception, everything was so natural and normal. It was as if this was how it should be. Was this how it should be? Lu Feng definitely did not think so. This was because he was no longer the ignorant existence of the past. His current strength, even before the death transformation, was comparable to a celestial god. If he did not care about life and death and broke the taboo, he could even suppress the time supremes. Therefore, he naturally understood how terrifying it was to forcibly inject this kind of language into his consciousness. This could no longer be described as strength. This was a kind of law, a law that surpassed any kind of power. Soon, Lu Feng calmed down slightly. He knew that if the other party really had such strength, it would be extremely easy for the other party to kill him. Since the other party did not do anything to him, he probably did not have any malicious intentions for the time being. Or perhaps he had some other ideas. As long as he could hold on for 3 to 4 months, when he had truly recovered to his peak state, he wouldn't care about anything at all. He could break the taboo domain at any time. He, Lu Feng, would be the most terrifying first-tier divine king. He would be able to resist the divine king, who could kill second-tier time supremes. At that time, he would not care about anything at all. What's wrong with you? Is your body still not good enough? As I said, ordinary people like us are destined to not become exalted immortals. Therefore, it's better to stay here in peace, get married, have children, and live the rest of our lives. Seeing Lu Feng's unsightly expression, the old man only thought that Lu Feng had not fully recovered. Therefore, he slowly said what he thought. After hearing this, Lu Feng smiled helplessly, but he didn't explain anything. He looked at the old man and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Old man, where's this place?" Hearing Lu Feng's words, the old man was slightly taken aback. He looked at Lu Feng with a very strange expression. After staring at Lu Feng for a while, he finally said, "Young man, did you hurt your head when you fell? How come you don't even know this?" Lu Feng was silent for a moment. He really did not know what to say now. Could it be that he should tell the old man that he was not from the space-time? That he was also baffled that he had come here? Not to mention that he would not say it out loud. Even if he did say it out loud, the old man would not believe him. Therefore, Lu Feng was really speechless at this moment. After experiencing so much and facing 9 different life experiences in the illusory realm of the 9 lives, Lu Feng only hesitated for a moment before he thought of how to answer. Chapter 798. Lu Feng looked at the old man, and there was an obvious look of confusion in his eyes. "Sir, I really don't remember anything." Hearing Lu Feng's words, the old man was silent for a moment. After a while, he opened his mouth and began to tell Lu Feng about everything that had happened and the situation here with a slightly sympathetic tone. The old man had found Luo Yunyang on the side of cliff. Of course, he couldn't say that he had found Luo Yunyang, because he had fallen from the cliff right in front of the old man. According to the old man, he had gone to the edge of the mountain to collect some herbs that day. Who would have thought that before he reached his destination, he would see a living person fall in front of him? He hadn't collected any herbs, but he had collected a living person. This was really unimaginable. However, the old man wasn't too shocked by this, because this wasn't the first time he had encountered such a situation. He had encountered such a situation several times in the past, so the old man checked to see if Lu Feng was still alive. After discovering that Lu Feng was still alive, he didn't even collect any herbs. Instead, he directly brought Lu Feng back. That mountain is infinitely vast. Legend has it that there is a sect of immortals on it. Every year, countless people would come here, wanting to ascend the immortal mountain and join the sect. Unfortunately, very few people succeed. In fact, it could be said that there are almost none. There are many people who return empty-handed. There are also many people who, due to various reasons, completely die on the mountaintop or slide down from the mountain. You are considered lucky. Although you fell, you didn't suffer much damage. You just fainted. Compared to those who died, you lost your memory. You are considered very lucky. At this point, the old man's eyes flashed with a hint of emotion. He had seen too many people like Lu Feng who had fallen from the top of the mountain. Every time he went there, he would see quite a few of them. However, 99% of them would fall to their deaths, and their corpses wouldn't even be complete. People like Lu Feng, who only lost his memories and didn't suffer much damage, were really too rare. Even the old man couldn't help but sigh. After all, they had saved more than 1 or 2 people. There were only a few who could survive. As for Lu Feng, he was the only one. Hearing this, Lu Feng fell silent. In the end, he gently nodded his head. Since others thought that he had lost his memory, he could only assume that in his current situation. Lu Feng smiled gratefully at the old man. Even without the old man's help, he didn't think that he would be in any danger. However, this also saved him a lot of trouble. Moreover, he also learned a lot of things. Therefore, Lu Feng still wanted to thank the old man. The old man had saved more than 1 or 2 people like Lu Feng. He didn't ask for anything in return for the others, and it was the same for Lu Feng. When Lu Feng was able to move on his own and wanted to leave, the old man even said that he would give Lu Feng some money to help him find the direction of his home. However, Lu Feng tactfully declined. Lu Feng was still very grateful to the old man. He had wanted to repay something in the past. Unfortunately, because of his physical body and soul, he couldn't use any profound skills at all. Therefore, he couldn't open his independent space at all. In this case, he really couldn't take out anything. Therefore, Lu Feng could only keep everything in his heart. After a few months, when he fully recovered, he would return to repay this kindness. Soon, Lu Feng left the old man's place. Standing in the center of the city and looking at the surrounding crowd, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with countless strange lights. However, after sensing the surroundings, this strange feeling gradually disappeared. At this moment, in the center of this small city, Lu Feng was really a loss. From the conversation with the old man, he already knew some things. Lu Feng knew that this was the state capital of Qing of the Darkhan dynasty, a small city under the jurisdiction of Lanling County. It was the lowest level city in the Darkhan dynasty. However, although it was one of the smallest cities, it was also very famous. After all, this place was just next to the celestial mountain that had an upper celestial sect, which attracted countless people. Lu Feng faintly sensed that the size of this small city was actually larger than the peak cities of the Human Race Federation in the Primal Universe. This scene obviously shocked Lu Feng. I originally thought that in such a small city in such a backward era, the size of the city should be extremely limited. But now it seems that I have underestimated this place. It's just the smallest city, but it's already so huge. The population here is probably no less than 3 million. If it's one of those large cities, I really don't know how terrifying it would be. In his heart, there were already some vague ideas, but Lu Feng dared not be very sure. After all, There were some things that he did not dare to imagine before he was certain. If I can use the mysteries now, then I can cover everything around me and completely sense it. Unfortunately, I can't use anything now. All I can see is what my eyes see. It seems that I have to recover as soon as possible. Only then can everything be. Sighing softly, Lu Feng's eyes were filled with determination. In the past, so many trials and tribulations had not been able to defeat him. Now this was just a setback. How could it make him lose his fighting spirit? Therefore, in the next moment, Lu Feng began to walk slowly towards the outside of the city. In this place, in addition to the prosperous Darkhan dynasty, according to the old man's description, there were other countries and organizations like the Iron and Blood Empire, the Red Alliance, and a few other countries. Apart from these, the old man did not know what else there was. Lu Feng understood this point. It was already very rare for people in a small city to know about the existence of the Iron and Blood Empire and the Red Alliance. He was wondering if there was any hope left for him to find out anything else. Moreover, according to the old man's description, this place was really too big. The old man had never left this city in his entire life. It was already very good that he knew this. Finally, when Lu Feng walked a short distance, he stopped and stood quietly in the center of this small city. Lu Feng began to slowly think. Very quickly, he sorted out his thoughts. Currently, the most important thing for me is not my strength. Now that I only rely on the existence of my physical body, although I can't use many mysteries, I'm not at a disadvantage against those experts. I should be able to suppress even the existence of an advanced true god. Moreover, I only need about 3 to 4 months to fully recover. At that time, my power will definitely be terrifyingly powerful. Once I shatter the Forbidden Domain, I will be able to easily crush everything. Therefore, strength is not the most important thing right now. Strength was not something he could recover just because he wanted to. After all, this kind of fusion process could not be rushed. Moreover, his current strength was enough to deal with most unexpected situations. Therefore, the current him was not in a hurry. Right now, the most important thing for me is to understand. Understand where I am. Understand everything around me. Only when I know where I am can I truly determine the space-time I am in and find the way back. Find the way back. This was Lu Feng's most important task right now, because he had to go back. The existence of God Punisher made Lu Feng feel a kind of terrifying danger descending. He felt a kind of terrifying existence. In his mind, the faction that was once nothing had become an extremely shocking organization that he could not resist. In the face of such an organization, Lu Feng had to go back. He had to go back because his family, friends, lovers, and all the people he was familiar with were there. If he was not there, then they would really be in danger. Therefore, Lu Feng had to go back. He had to go back. At this thought, Lu Feng finally sorted out his thoughts. He knew that it was impossible for these ordinary people to know where this was. However, just because they did not know, it did not mean that some existences did not know. At the very least, Lu Feng knew that there were powerhouses in this world. No matter where it was, the greatest secrets of a space-time were usually in the hands of the strongest powerhouses. Only the strongest powerhouses had the right to know all the secrets. Obviously, if he wanted to know everything, Lu Feng would have to find the strongest powerhouses. As Lu Feng was thinking, he suddenly thought of the old man's words. The sect of an exalted immortal. Since they're called exalted immortals and can fly, then they must be at least martial-level existences. As a sect where powerhouses gather, they must know much more than the people around me. When he thought of this, Lu Feng did not hesitate. He immediately ran in the direction of the terrifying mountain that seemed to connect heaven and earth. Even though he had lost all his power and was only relying on the strength of his physical body, Lu Feng's strength was still unimaginable and astonishing. Lu Feng did not know when it had started, but he had felt that his physical body seemed to carry some kind of terrifying power and mystery. This power and profundity not only strengthened his body, but also gave him an indescribable feeling. His movements carried the terror of a supreme will. This physical body makes me think of a possibility. He suddenly stopped in his tracks again. The pupils in his eyes twitched slightly. The possibility that Lu Feng had thought of was really terrifying. After all, he should still be very, very far away from that realm. It is really hard to imagine what kind of benefits I have obtained. Previously, I had only just condensed my supreme battle body to the supreme divine body realm. Logically speaking, without countless years of tempering and forging, I would not be able to improve at all. After all, this is the condensation of the body. It is not something that can be achieved by comprehending. However, how long has it been? My body is actually getting closer to the sacred truth body. I can feel that after 3 or 4 months. Even if my physical body is not the sacred truth body, it will not be too far off. It is really hard to imagine. If possible, Lu Feng really wanted to know what had happened during the period when he had been unconscious or basically dead. He knew his own body very well. Under those circumstances, he would have died without a doubt. There would have been no way to treat him. When he had been seriously injured at that time, the time Overlord had been unable to do anything about it. In such a situation where he was bound to die, he had actually survived and obtained shocking benefits. This was really too inconceivable. Moreover, he could feel that the benefits he had obtained were not brought about by his cultivation technique. All of this seemed to have been forcibly bestowed upon him by something special. It had nothing to do with his own cultivation. Although he should be happy to have obtained benefits, Lu Feng did not feel very comfortable from the bottom of his heart. After all, he wanted to be in control of everything and not be in a daze like this. Chapter 799. Luo Yinyang exhaled softly. His speed didn't slow down. Instead, it started to increase. In the end, it became even more valiant and shocking. Lu Feng knew that because of the mysterious existence that was gradually being injected into his body, his movements would unconsciously bring about this mysterious existence. Therefore, although he didn't use it, when he moved, the mysterious power was indeed everywhere. The huge mountain, which was originally very far away from the city, only took Lu Feng a few minutes to reach it. Furthermore, Lu Feng hadn't used all of his power yet. Lu Feng stood quietly at the foot of this tall mountain as he lifted his head and gazed at the peak of the mountain. At this moment, Lu Feng's heart skipped a beat. Lu Feng exhaled softly. There was a complicated look in his eyes. It was an indescribably complicated look. Previously, he had only heard about it from the old man. However, now that he was really here, Lu Feng finally realized how terrifying the old man and the so-called tall were. As he lowered his head slightly, Lu Feng's mind was in complete turmoil. Previously, because he hadn't been able to use any mysterious power, what he had seen had been through his own eyes. Sometimes, it was easy to deceive oneself with what one saw. Obviously, without the help of his divine sense, he had been deceived by his own eyes. Now that he had finally arrived at the foot of this huge mountain, when he looked carefully, he finally discovered something. He had finally guessed it. He had finally understood. So I actually came here. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood everything. Previously, I felt that there were many strange places. Now, if this is really the case, then everything could be explained clearly. When he had first seen the old man, Lu Feng had been able to sense a strange existence. The strange feeling he had felt was coming from the old man's body. The old man was really just an ordinary old man. There was nothing wrong with this. However, although he was ordinary, he wasn't really ordinary either. Lu Feng could sense that the old man's body was really healthy. It was even somewhat powerful. This kind of physical body wasn't any worse than an ordinary beginner or even a high-level beginner warrior. However, the old man's body didn't have the condensed power of a warrior. In other words, the old man's existence should only be due to the strength of his physical body. His physical body is so strong. Either he has consumed some kind of divine item, or this space is suitable for his growth. As he walked out of the small city, Lu Feng saw many people. They were the same as the old man. Although they didn't have the origin of a warrior, their physical strength was really strong, and many people in their prime's physical strength. This was, without a doubt, shocking the world. At that time, Lu Feng began to have some doubts. When he walked out of the city and saw the so-called tall mountain that the old man had mentioned, he finally realized where he was. According to what the old man said, this mountain doesn't seem to be the largest mountain. In fact, it's not even the largest among the surrounding areas. But this mountain, standing at the foot of the mountain, Lu Feng used his eyes to sense. Relying on his years of experience, he finally understood. This mountain was really a huge mountain. It was really a huge mountain. It was comparable to at least a third-grade or second-grade life planet. It was no wonder that the old man had never climbed this mountain, even though he had such a strong physical fitness. He hadn't even passed through the area at the foot of the mountain. It was impossible for an ordinary being to cross such a huge mountain without at least a few decades. And the prerequisite was to know the exact location. In such a deep mountain, in such a huge mountain comparable to a second-grade life planet, it was basically impossible not to get lost. So, although the old man had lived here for a long time, he probably hadn't left the foot of the mountain until now. Looking at the huge mountain, Lu Feng sighed slightly. In the original universe, Lu Feng had only heard that such a terrifying mountain existed in the area where the Tian Dao race lived. Although there weren't many of them. But in this place, there was one so casually. This made Lu Feng really shocked. Combining everything I've sensed before, although there's still some things I can't be sure of, it should be like this. This should be my destination. Lu Feng had already guessed that this should be his destination. This should be the place he wanted to go. It should be the place that existed in the depths of the outer region battlefield. The place that belonged to the original immortal devil era. Although he didn't know how he got here, Lu Feng knew that he had really arrived. At this moment, a hint of gloominess appeared on his face. He thought of what the phantom had said. Lu Feng clearly remembered that the shadowy figure had told him clearly that once he entered this place and wanted to leave, the time required would not be a small number. Lu Feng knew that such a great existence wouldn't lie to him. Therefore, what he said should be true. Even if Lu Feng didn't want to believe it, he had to believe it. His expression became extremely gloomy in an instant. Lu Feng's heart was in turmoil, and an indescribable feeling appeared in his heart. This was a kind of madness, a kind of pessimism, and a kind of despair. He really couldn't calm down. In the past, even if he had to leave for a year, 10 years, or even 100 years, he could still afford to wait. But now, with the appearance of Godslayer, he really couldn't let go. He really couldn't let go of anything. Godslayer was really too terrifying. Just the temporal overlords alone had appeared, and the number of Divine King Supreme had reached a shocking 8. Among them, there was even a peak Divine King Supreme like the Sky Tuol Lynx. As for the others, they probably wouldn't be too bad either. Not to mention the terrifying temporal overlords, the terrifying Divine King Supreme, and the Prophet of Godslayer aren't existences that ordinary existences can contend against. He can easily suppress several temporal overlords at the same time. In terms of strength, that prophet is probably even stronger than the Divine King Anarchy. Plus, there's this hidden, terrifying power of Godslayer. The more he thought about it, the more unsightly Lu Feng's expression became. He knew that if it weren't for the appearance of all the human race's heretic supremes, and if the Divine King Anarchy hadn't made a move, the power displayed by Godslayer alone would have been enough to sweep away all the peak overlords of the entire universe. How could such a terrifying power make Lu Feng feel at ease? His expression changed countless times. In the end, Lu Feng could only sigh softly. He looked into the distance, as if he could see through the space of the world. There was an indescribable color in his expression. I know that you still exist. I hope that you can take into account the origin of your bloodline and take action at the crucial moment to protect your bloodline. Lu Feng was sure. He knew. He was really sure. The human king, the greatest human king supreme since ancient times, was still alive. He was definitely still alive. He was hidden in some unknown space-time. For some unknown reason, he had been quietly waiting all this time. Lu Feng felt this all too clearly. This was because when he had shattered the shackles of his bloodline and condensed a true supreme divine body, Lu Feng had truly felt it when he had completely eliminated his bloodline. At that moment, he had even felt like he had seen the human king's existence. Therefore, Lu Feng was sure that the human king, Liu Bei, was really still alive. He knew that if the human king was willing to take action, then the so-called God Slayer would simply be a joke. After all, the Sky Tool Lynx had also said that although the God Slayer was powerful, it didn't have the power to obliterate the overlords of an epic. The human king was a supreme ruler, the strongest supreme ruler after the primordial immortal demon era. He was even more terrifying than the overlords of an epic. Therefore, he didn't fear the God Slayer. Lu Feng softly restrained his expression and finally looked at the towering mountain peak in front of him. Although he knew that he wouldn't be able to return anytime soon, Lu Feng still didn't want to give up. He had to become stronger. He had to work hard to become stronger. If you want to go back, there are actually two ways. The first way is to become sufficiently powerful. When I am so powerful that nothing can restrict me, I will be able to return. This is probably the path that the Supreme Ruler has in mind. Lu Feng could somewhat guess what the Supreme Ruler was thinking. The Supreme Ruler was most likely hoping that after Lu Feng became a pinnacle great being, he would be able to rely on his own power to break through all obstacles and return to the primal universe. However, other than that path, there are other ways. That is to find the path back. I believe that there isn't only one path back. As long as I can find it, I will definitely be able to return in advance. At the thought of this, Lu Feng raised his head and looked at the mountain peak. Finally, he started to move. If there really was a path, then it would most likely be in the hands of those great beings. Obviously, he didn't have the means to come into contact with those great beings now. Therefore, his first task was to find such a sect and slowly make contact with it. After thinking this through, Lu Feng naturally stopped hesitating. He knew that the so-called upper immortal sect above was a place that he had to go to. Lu Feng's speed began to slowly increase. This time, Lu Feng's speed had reached the extreme. The dangerous areas around him seemed like a complete joke. Although he couldn't use any profound mysteries, Lu Feng's current body wasn't something that anyone could compare to. As a result, his speed had reached a level that could shock the world. Ordinary beings might not be able to reach half of the journey, even after a few years. However, Lu Feng had reached at least half of the journey in the time it took for a few incense sticks to burn. Of course, this was the result of Lu Feng suppressing his own power. If he were to let go of everything, then with his current power, the so-called mountain peak would be a joke. Along the way, Lu Feng saw too many skeletons. Some had almost turned into ashes, and some hadn't even decomposed. Lu Feng knew that there were probably many people who wanted to reach the mountain peak and join the upper immortal sect. Every year, or even every moment, there would be some. However, those who could truly enter were few and far between. Lu Feng also understood that even if these people reached the mountain peak and wanted to join, it wouldn't be that easy. After all, the path of cultivation depended on one's aptitude. Without aptitude, it was really too difficult. After another few incense sticks worth of time, Lu Feng finally reached the mountain peak and arrived in front of the terrifying main gate. Chapter 800. Looking at the magnificent and terrifying mountain gate in front of him, Lu Feng exhaled softly. As expected, it's the sect of an exalted immortal. In front of him, the terrifying giant gate that was hundreds of feet tall was incomparably majestic. However, for Lu Feng, it didn't matter even if it was thousands of feet tall, let alone hundreds of feet. What really shocked Lu Feng was the material of the entire giant gate. This gate seemed to be condensed from some shocking godly item. From above, Lu Feng could even feel the fluctuations of the power of laws. One had to know that godly items with the fluctuations of the power of laws were at least 6th grade and above. In 6th grade, godly items were already considered incomparably precious. But here, they actually used such a large number of 6th grade godly items as the main gate. Such extravagance was indescribably extravagant. As expected of an exalted immortal sect, this was the second time Lu Feng had said such a thing. And this time, it wasn't because Lu Feng had discovered something. The reason for all of this was because Lu Feng had seen it. He had seen the name of this sect, Exalted Immortal Sect, Exalted Immortal Sect. Lu Feng really didn't expect that there would actually be such a sect that was named Exalted Immortal Sect. If this was in the primal universe, it wouldn't be a big deal to call it that. But here, it was really somewhat inconceivable. After all, most of the existences here addressed those martial artists as exalted immortals. And this place was called Exalted Immortal Sect. It was really too much to ask whether to laugh or cry. Gently shaking his head, Lu Feng could only brace himself and walk forward. However, the moment Lu Feng stepped through the main gate, a powerful and majestic aura suddenly descended from the void. Naturally, such an aura was really nothing to Lu Feng. Even if it was 100 times, 1,000 times, or 10,000 times stronger, it was still nothing. This was because such an aura only belonged to the realm of a martial artist in the evolution stage. One had to know that before going through the transformation, he didn't even fear the aura of a heavenly god. Previously, when he had transformed into a truly world-shocking emperor, he had entered a terrifying state. In the face of these so-called auras, Lu Feng was completely indifferent. Although he couldn't use his soul, Lu Feng only had his physical body. Nothing could compare to him. Therefore, after feeling the aura, Lu Feng didn't feel anything strange at all. In the next moment, the majesty gradually disappeared. At the same time, a figure appeared in front of Lu Feng. Looking at the owner of the figure, Lu Feng narrowed his eyes slightly. This time, Lu Feng was shocked once again. He was truly shocked. When he saw the owner of that figure, he had already sensed it. The owner of this figure was just an ordinary evolutionary stage martial artist who had just reached the genius level. It was really nothing. But the speed at which he appeared just now was not much worse than an ordinary martial artist in the upheaval period. Undoubtedly, such a scene really shocked Lu Feng. As expected of a space left behind from the primordial immortal devil era. It's really terrifying. Although a person's speed could reach such a level, the biggest reason for this was probably because of techniques. After accumulating for countless eras, the beings here had probably studied all kinds of things to an extremely profound degree. Compared to them, the so-called techniques and fighting techniques of those supreme beings in the primal universe were nothing. Looking at the being in front of him, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a myriad of strange emotions. Finally, he slowly calmed down. At this moment, he didn't say anything. He didn't even do anything. He just quietly looked at that person. And that venerable martial artist also quietly sized up Lu Feng for a long time. Lu Feng could clearly see the bewilderment and doubt in his eyes. However, these expressions quickly disappeared, and they were replaced by an indifferent expression. The martial artist looked at Lu Feng and nodded lightly. Then he finally opened his mouth and said, "You are very good." Lu Feng still looked the same as before. He was good. Of course, he was good. Although the techniques and combat techniques of the primordial universe, as well as the body quality and soul level of those creatures, were not comparable to those of the people here, Lu Feng was not the same as those people in the primordial universe. He was the emperor of the current era. He suppressed everything and was recognized as the #1 demon since ancient times. How could he be bad? Therefore, in the face of this venerable martial artist's praise, Lu Feng was really indifferent. Obviously, the martial artist was also surprised by Lu Feng's behavior. After being stationed at the entrance for such a long time, he had seen countless beings. There were descendants of famous clans and children of poor families. Among them, there were many who were outstanding talents. But no matter what those people, before they became true great beings, showed different expressions when they first came here and saw him for the first time. Among these expressions, only Lu Feng's expression at this moment was not indifference. It was really incomparable indifference. It was as if in front of him, he was nothing. He was the same as the mountains, the rivers, the grass, and the trees. There was no difference at all. This was not to say that the young man looked down on him, but he felt that in the young man's eyes, there was no existence that was worth paying attention to. He regarded everyone as ants. Just now, after he could not help but praise him, the young man was still like this. This made him really unable to tolerate the strangeness. There had never been anyone like Lu Feng who had been able to rent a house to such an extent. After staring at each other for a long time, Lu Feng did not show any difference. However, the martial artist seemed to feel that he had lost his composure. He coughed lightly and regained his previous gaze, looking in Lu Feng's direction. My immortal sect has a rule. No matter who enters the sect, they will have to serve a month of hard labor. After the hard labor, they will undergo the aptitude test to see if they can be selected to enter the sect. As he looked at Lu Feng, the evolution stage martial artist said word by word, "Are you willing?" Lu Feng smiled faintly. However, his smile was only a superficial one. The martial artist could clearly see the indifference in Lu Feng's eyes. He simply did not have the slightest hint of a smile. However, Lu Feng's voice was still heard. "I am willing." These three simple words woke the martial artist up. He looked at Lu Feng and sized him up for a long time before finally turning around. "Come with me." As he followed the martial artist, Lu Fenglai arrived at a place that looked like a woodshed. There, he would work for a month to use those special tools to crush the precious divine objects in front of him. Actually, after seeing this, Lu Feng understood that this was probably just a test. After all, although the third-grade divine objects were hard, any supremacy who came here would be able to crush them in an instant with a wave of his arm. However, they did not do that. They even spent a lot of effort to create these special tools so that those people could cut them. That was all. During the month that he worked there, Lu Feng was always alone. Of course, he did not know if there was really someone monitoring his surroundings. Therefore, from the beginning to the end, Lu Feng was always working at a slightly faster speed than a normal person. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. During this month, Lu Feng's power had gradually begun to recover. Today was the day that his work officially ended. It was also the day that Lu Feng could truly use his power. After gently putting down the tools, Lu Feng got up and walked out. After recovering a part of his power, Lu Feng finally spread out a part of his divine consciousness. After taking a look, Lu Feng smiled slightly. This was because Lu Feng realized that there was indeed someone monitoring him here. And the person monitoring him was even a warrior in the upheaval stage. Of course, Lu Feng really did not care about this. After all, an existence in the upheaval stage was not even an ant in front of him now. With my current power, once fully recovered, I should be able to easily suppress any pinnacle true god. Even if it's a heavenly god, I should be able to fight against him and not be at a disadvantage. This was Lu Feng's power at the moment. Such power was absolutely incomparably terrifying. It was no different from his peak state in the past. And now, there was still a long way to go before he could truly recover. Previously, I became a pinnacle demigod from the first-grade demigod. My power has increased by more than one generation. In addition, I have comprehended the law of space and time. Then, my strength is even more terrifying. If I really count, I should be almost on par with a high-level heavenly god. Of course, my strongest strength should be equivalent to a high-level heavenly god. After all, it's really not that easy to reach the pinnacle heavenly god level. But this time, it's different. It's completely different. I believe that if I can really use all of my power, if I can really recover all of my power, then I can even fight against a pinnacle heavenly god. From fighting against a high-level heavenly god to a pinnacle heavenly god, although it was only a small increase of one level. But this small increase of one level was on the basis that Lu Feng had already surpassed so much. If those supreme kings knew about this, they would definitely be in despair. They would really be in complete despair. Because under the situation where they were at the same level as Lu Feng was already able to surpass them by an entire level. Well, now it's time to change and see what's going on here. Previously, because he had just arrived here, even his divine sense had not recovered. Therefore, he did not know or see anything at all. In addition, Lu Feng was not sure if there was really an expert in this upper deity sect. Therefore, for safety's sake, he had obediently chopped divine objects for a month. Now that he had finally recovered some of his power, he could finally relax a little. He used his divine sense and began to observe the situation around him. In the next moment, Lu Feng's divine sense began to spread out. Chapter 801. In an instant, Lu Feng was slightly stunned. In the next moment, countless fluctuations appeared in his eyes. This was an indescribable color that reached the depths of his soul, causing Lu Feng to feel an indescribable shock. How can this be? Lu Feng was also slightly stunned at this moment. This was the first time he truly observed this space left behind by the immortal devil era. Previously, he had only observed with his eyes. Without the support of his soul, he simply could not see the inner essence of this space. However, this time, using his soul to feel was really too shocking. It was too indescribable. After a while, he slowly withdrew from his observation. Lu Feng's face was still filled with boundless shock, that kind of indescribable shock. He was truly shocked. He was thoroughly shocked, because what Lu Feng saw was really too outrageous. Restrictive spells, so many restrictive spells. This is indeed a space left behind by the immortal devil era. Because other than the immortal devil era, there is no other era that can evolve restrictions to such a profound degree. Back then, Lu Feng had seen countless restrictions in the Human King Palace of the Human King planet. Those were all condensed by the Human King. It was true that those restrictions were millions of times more terrifying than the Immortal Gate. However, the essence of the profound mysteries within was not too far off. Who was the Human King? He was the first person in the Endless Era. After the Immortal Devil Era, he was the first and only eternal existence that became a supreme ruler. His existence was indescribable. However, the level of the restrictions of this small sect was actually not too far off from the Human King's restrictions. This was really a little shocking. However, when Lu Feng continued to observe, he was even more shocked. This immortal sect is not simple. It's really not simple. When he first saw those restrictions, Lu Feng thought that the restrictions in this space left behind by the immortal devil era had developed to such a terrifying degree that even such a small sect could possess them. However, as Lu Feng continued to observe, he realized that he was wrong. He was really wrong. Looks like I have underestimated the mortal king and also underestimated this high immortal sect. Although the existence of the human monarch was born in the technological era, he was able to travel through time and space to battle the great powerhouses of the ancient era. This meant that his greatness was recognized by the era. How could such an existence be so simple? Then, the reason why the essence of the restrictions here was close to the restrictions created by human kings wasn't because the remnants of the primitive immortal and devil era were so terrifying, but because the person who created the countless restrictions of the immortal sect was absolutely terrifying. Actually, Lu Feng didn't intend to participate in the so-called assessment. Everything was just this idea that had just appeared in his mind. Previously, he entered this place to take a look at the situation and at the same time, let himself slowly recover. Just now, after he finally recovered a portion of his power, Lu Feng planned to see through the situation here and then try to directly enter the core area to obtain everything he needed. However, after seeing those restrictions, Lu Feng gave up. He finally gave up all his previous thoughts. He was afraid that he really didn't have the strength to face such a mysterious sect directly. Therefore, Lu Feng decided to participate in this sect's assessment at the last minute. At the very least, before he fully recovered his strength, he had to keep a low profile, and low profile. Thinking of this, Lu Feng's footsteps slightly quickened. Of course, he only sped up slightly. He didn't really use his maximum speed. Everything was just right. Not only did it show Lu Feng's slightly anxious expression, but it also showed the limit of Lu Feng's strength. Soon, Lu Feng finally arrived at the square. Looking at the hundreds of figures in the square, Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. Previously, he heard that he had to serve for a full month before he could enter the assessment. Today was exactly the full month of his service. However, there were hundreds of figures here. In other words, there must have been hundreds of people on the day he entered this place. It seems that this immortal sect is quite attractive. There are so many people coming to the mountain peak every day. This was the number of people arriving every day, not the number of people climbing every day. During the process of climbing the mountain, Lu Feng could be considered to have understood. Not to mention how long the journey was. The dangerous places along the way were enough to make 99% of people unable to reach the mountain peak. However, at this moment, there were still hundreds of people gathered here. This proved that the number of people climbing the mountain every day was at least an astonishing 100,000. Lu Feng heaved a sigh of relief when he thought of this number. With one step, Lu Feng finally arrived among the many people taking the assessment. With a cursory glance, Lu Feng could see clearly. At this moment, the number of people here was about 230. They were all gathered here quietly, waiting for the assessment to begin. Looking at these people, Lu Feng sighed slightly. He could feel that these people were not ordinary people. In the original universe, these people were at least first-class geniuses. Many of them had already become warriors. In Lu Feng's perception, the strongest person had even reached the standard of an advanced warrior. As for the others, although they hadn't become warriors, their physical fitness was very strong. They weren't any worse than intermediate warriors. It could be said that there were a lot of talents here. Unfortunately, according to Lu Feng's standards, there wasn't even a Federation-level genius among the geniuses here. However, after a while, Lu Feng could only chuckle and shake his head. He could only smile helplessly at his own thoughts. The number of geniuses at the Federation level in the original universe's human federation was extremely limited. Moreover, these people were nurtured from a young age, born from the tens of millions of people of the human race. At this moment, the number of people gathered here was definitely limited. It was normal that there wouldn't be any Federation-level geniuses here. After figuring this out, Lu Feng didn't think too much about it. In his eyes, he quietly watched the figure walking down slowly in front of him. Lu Feng's expression became solemn. It was a venerable warrior, a perfect stage warrior. A perfect stage warrior, even in the Federation and the entire human race, was considered a very honorable existence. Among the countless existences, a perfect stage warrior's status was almost above that of 1 trillion people. However, here, in this upper immortal sect, a perfect stage warrior actually walked out so casually. This made Lu Feng even more interested in this upper immortal sect. The perfect stage warrior was a middle-aged man. His robes were decorated with countless complicated patterns. Just by standing there quietly, he looked like a mountain. The feeling he gave off was incomparably terrifying. Previously, Lu Feng was only pretending to be solemn. However, after carefully sensing this person's aura, he really became solemn. This was because Lu Feng could clearly feel the strength of this perfect stage warrior. This was definitely not an ordinary perfect stage warrior. Although he was only at the intermediate level, Lu Feng believed that he definitely had the terrifying power to obliterate a first-tier demigod. Obliterate, not fight. The aura exuding from his body was such a valiant willpower. Lu Feng had always firmly believed in his own judgment. Chapter 802. Exhaling softly, Lu Feng watched as the perfect stage warrior finally walked in front of him. At this moment, his eyes had already regained their previous calm expression. The perfect stage warrior stood in front of more than 200 people. He did not move at all. He just glanced around slightly, and it was this glance that made everyone unconsciously straighten their bodies. Although they did not care about this perfect stage warrior. But in order to cooperate with everyone, Lu Feng also followed suit and straightened his chest. Now, he had already recovered a part of his divine consciousness and power. If he was deliberately pretending, then how could a mere warrior who was not even a demigod see through his real situation? So, naturally, the perfect stage warrior was deceived. Finally, after sweeping his gaze around, his eyes had covered all of the people in the room. At this moment, his voice rang clearly. I am the outer sect elder of the upper immortal sect, and also the assessment elder this time. Lu Feng had already guessed this point. However, what Lu Feng did not expect was that this elder was actually just an outer sect elder. Outer sect. As soon as he heard this name, he could understand some things. In the original universe, Lu Feng knew that there were countless sects among the many pinnacle Overlord races. Among these sects, there were also outer sect and outer sect members. In those sects, the outer sect members were just some ordinary disciples. It could even be said that they were gathered by some disciples who were doing odd jobs. Compared to the inner sect disciples, their status was far too inferior. Even if they were outer sect elders, their status would not be too high. In the original universe, among the sects that Lu Feng knew of, basically all the outer sect elders were inner sect disciples who did not have many achievements. It could be said that the existence of the outer sect was really an insignificant place in a sect. Of course, it could not be said that it was completely insignificant. After all, when many inner sect disciples needed something or needed some services, it was all done by outer sect disciples. However, Lu Feng really did not expect that in his eyes, this middle-rank perfect stage martial artist, who was already considered a genius, was actually just an outer sect elder. Either this meant that the space of the primordial immortal and devil era was truly terrifying, or that this immortal sect was hiding too much power. In Lu Feng's eyes, he was more inclined towards the second type. He knew that the primordial immortal devil age was indeed terrifying, but it shouldn't have reached such an extreme degree. After all, everything that was displayed now was a little too strong. Lu Feng sat there silently, a strange feeling in his heart as he continued to listen to the elder from the outer sect of the exalted immortal. This time, you were able to come here because of your persistence. This is your perseverance. At this point, a strange emotion appeared in the eyes of the outer sect elder of the upper immortal sect. It was extremely complicated and bewildering. However, all of this happened in an instant. Perhaps others couldn't see it, but Lu Feng could see it clearly. At this moment, a thought appeared in his mind. That was this outer sect elder of the exalted immortal sect definitely had an unknown past. Looking at the crowd, the elder of the upper immortal sect continued. You should know that the path of cultivating the immortal Tao is actually to fight against the heavens and snatch from others. Snatching from others requires aptitude. However, if you have the support of a powerful sect, then you can snatch everything. And to fight against the heavens, this isn't something that anyone can help you with. Lu Feng nodded lightly. He was very clear about all of this. In the primordial universe, everything went smoothly for him at the beginning. However, later on, when he stepped onto the path, he was completely abandoned by the universe origin. Time and time again, the calamities came without a break. Although Lu Feng didn't feel any pain from these, if this continued for a long time, it would still affect his cultivation. Fighting against the heavens was actually fighting for the fate of heaven and earth. This had nothing to do with anyone else. If one wanted to succeed, then one had to rely on one's own hard work and willpower. Setting up the mountain gate here is a kind of test. In my upper immortal sect, aptitude is only ranked second. What we need are those with strong willpower. Only those with the strongest willpower are qualified to enter our upper immortal sect. Fortunately, you were able to make it here. This proves that you have passed the first test of willpower. You are already considered outer sect disciples of our upper immortal sect. Hearing this, everyone was slightly stunned. In the next moment, countless excited expressions appeared. These people were so excited that they were a little crazy. In their minds, if they wanted to enter this upper immortal sect, they would have to go through layers of tests. However, who would have thought that just by coming here, they would have already passed the tests and become outer sect disciples? At this moment, many people's faces were flushed red. They started to imagine themselves becoming upper immortals in the future and flying through the sky and earth. When he saw the excited faces of these people, the outer sect elder of the upper mortal sect had a strange expression on his face. And it was this trace of color that made Lu Feng slightly stunned. From this color, Lu Feng saw a kind of coldness, a kind of mockery, and even a kind of bloodlust. At this moment, Lu Feng slightly narrowed his eyes. However, when he saw the outer sect elder looking at him, he revealed the same expression of excitement. However, if the outer sect elder looked carefully, he would be able to see that in the depths of Lu Feng's eyes, there was a kind of color that seemed to have seen through everything. All right, now we will begin the aptitude test. I will give you a disciple rank according to your aptitude. The higher the rank, the more resources you will receive. The lower the rank, the less. You may follow me. Hearing that the test was really about to begin, many people calmed down their excited expressions. They knew that this test would determine a lot of things, and it would affect their future. Therefore, many people paid great attention to this matter. At this moment, following the outer sect elder's footsteps, these people began to move. The group of more than 200 people walked for nearly half a day before finally arriving at their destination. It was a square that was not considered scary. Of course, it was not scary, but relatively speaking, because just now, Lu Feng had already seen that this square did not seem to be the only one here. There were many other similarly huge squares in the surroundings. When Lu Feng released his divine sense, he felt that there was a real scary square that was more than 100 times bigger than this one behind. The group of people arrived at the square and quietly stood in place. However, looking at their expressions, Lu Feng also knew that these people would not be able to truly calm down, leaving Lu Feng and the other outer sect disciples standing in place. The elder walked directly to the center of the square. At this moment, after he made some complicated hand seals, rays of light suddenly appeared on the square. In an instant, these rays of light actually began to condense and began to form light pillars. In the end, all the rays of light on the square disappeared, leaving behind more than 200 light pillars that seemed to reach the sky. Seeing this, Lu Feng finally understood what was going on. Most likely, these light pillars were used for the test. Lu Feng could already see that the number of light pillars was equal to the number of people taking the test. In other words, every test taker had to use a light pillar. Sure enough, in the next moment, the elder from the upper immortal sect spoke. Your test is very simple. You just need to enter the light pillar, and everything will be fine. When you walk out of the light pillar, the color of the light pillar will change. The light pillar will display different colors. At that time, the colors that appear will be able to show your aptitude. Hearing this, everyone nodded lightly. In the next moment, they all showed an eager expression. The elder from the upper immortal sect looked at the many disciples, nodded lightly, and waved his arm. At this moment, countless light pillars moved one after another. In the next moment, they had already appeared in front of each of them. Lu Feng looked at the light pillar in front of him, but his divine sense had already begun to penetrate it. Unfortunately, Lu Feng only felt that the light pillar was incomparably complicated and even mysterious. As for the rest, he didn't understand at all. In his ear, the elder's voice sounded again. All right, you all walk into the light pillar yourselves. Remember, when a light pillar is testing your aptitude, it may be very painful. This is also part of the test. You all must persevere. Persevere until all the pain has disappeared before you can leave. If you can't even pass this test, then you don't deserve to be a disciple of the upper immortal sect. At the end, the elder's voice even carried a slightly serious tone. Hearing this, the expressions of the disciples turned serious and they nodded their heads heavily. In the next moment, Many of the disciples took a deep breath and finally took a step forward, walking into the light pillar. Seeing that the disciples had already entered, Lu Feng didn't hesitate. He looked at the light pillar and finally smiled lightly, moving his feet and walking into it. Pain, it was indeed a little painful. However, this pain was completely within the limits of Lu Feng's tolerance. To him, this pain was no different from scratching an itch. However, at this moment, as he stood in the light pillar and felt the strangeness of his body, Lu Feng's eyes turned cold. It was a kind of endless coldness. This was because Lu Feng had already felt it. He had already completely felt what this light pillar was. Pain. It was definitely going to be painful. How could it not be painful? The existence of this light pillar wasn't a test, but devouring. It devoured the essence, energy, and spirit of the candidates, and even vaguely devoured their lifespan and luck. This scene made Lu Feng's heart surge with endless killing intent. Through the hazy light pillar, Lu Feng could see everything. He could see everything that was happening in the square at this moment. At this moment, he saw the other test takers in the other light pillars shouting frantically and howling in pain. However, they were all persevering. Not a single one of them walked out of this place. Not a single one of them chose to give up. Lu Feng exhaled softly. It seems like in order to absorb this essence, spirit, luck, and life, these people have to be willing. They must have grasped the idea of these people wanting to soar, so they used this so-called test as an excuse to make these people voluntarily sacrifice themselves. Sacrifice. This was a sacrifice. Lu Feng had already thought of it. He thought of a kind of existence that he had heard of before. It was a process that extracted everything from a person and finally condensed it into a single type of power. And this process was a sacrificial offering. However, in order to perform a sacrifice, there were too many harsh conditions. The most stringent of all was that the person who made the sacrifice had to be willing to do it. Lu Feng finally understood what was going on. What a good scheme. Although the people who were able to reach the top of the mountain weren't necessarily talented, their willpower was incomparably firm. Obviously, the process of this sacrifice was extremely painful. Without sufficient willpower, one simply couldn't withstand it. The so-called test at the top of the mountain was indeed a test of a disciple's willpower. However, the reason it was a test of willpower was just to find some people who could withstand the process of the sacrifice without collapsing. Everything was just that. Chapter 803. Lu Feng heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the crazed behavior of the people outside. However, when he shifted his gaze, he was stunned. This was because Lu Feng saw another figure slowly walking towards the center of the square, standing beside the outer sanctum elder. Faced with the arrival of the other person, the outer sect elder's attitude completely changed. Previously, when he faced the other disciples, he had a dignified and even awe-inspiring appearance. It was only when he saw the scene of the disciples cheering that he briefly revealed a negative expression. For the rest of the time, he put on a very good disguise. However, at this moment, when he saw the person who had come, an extremely humble expression appeared on his face. Lu Feng could no longer see the righteous and dignified expression from before in his eyes. He was just a lowly person who groveled and bent his knees. Lu Feng understood. Perhaps this was the true face of the exalted immortal's outer sect elder. Lu Feng was slightly surprised when he saw the young man. Lu Feng could sense a lot now that he could use power. Naturally, he could easily sense that the so-called young man was actually older than this middle-aged outer sect elder. Moreover, his strength was far from what this outer sect elder could compare to. His soul and physical body have already been deified. His will is also on the verge of deification. I'm afraid it won't be long before he can enter. This was a true demigod existence. In fact, he was at the peak of the second tier of the demigod realm. Lu Feng could also sense that this was a genius who belonged to the peak. He was a genius who could challenge those 3 tiers above him. A genius at the peak of the second tier of the demigod realm. Interesting, very interesting. The two of them approached each other. Perhaps it had never occurred to them that there would be people who could hear and see everything outside through the pillar of sacrifice during the sacrifice. Therefore, when they spoke, there was no hint of concealment at all. Looking at the groveling figure, the young man who arrived last had a mocking look on his face. However, when the outer sect elder lifted his head, the mocking look disappeared and was replaced by a dignified look. Seeing this, Lu Feng smiled coldly and mockingly. At this moment, he no longer had a good impression of this so-called upper immortal sect. This sect, from top to bottom, was filled with such trash. The young man looked at the color of the light pillars, shook his head slightly, and said, "A small place is a small place. It is impossible to produce a disciple above level 4. I just don't understand why those elders insist on placing a sub-school here. This is simply a waste of time and energy." The high immortal outer sect elder nodded his head lightly. Senior apprentice brother is right. There really aren't any advanced disciples here. I've been guarding this place for more than 20 years, and I've only seen one rank 3 disciple. The number of rank 2 disciples doesn't exceed 10. The rest are just trash. According to reason, with the level of the sub-school under our feet, even if it is not good, it should be placed in the imperial city of the Star Empire. But the head sect elder actually placed it here on a barren mountain in the small Great Han Empire. This is really a bit unbelievable. These words were not deliberately said by the outer sect elder to curry favor with the young man, but he really thought so. Naturally, the young man also knew. The decision of the head sect elder is not something we can comment on. No matter what, since the head sect has decided, then we will do it. But then again, there's no need for that. If it wasn't for the fact that this place is too remote, how could it be our turn to be stationed here? Although we can't get any benefits, but to be able to cultivate in such a sub-school is already very good for rank 3 disciples like us. Hearing this, the outer sect elder gently nodded his head. Senior apprentice brother's words are true. If you want to cultivate in such a sub-school, you must be at least a rank 4 disciple. But because this place is too remote, it is convenient for us. The young man glanced around and looked at the more than 200 light pillars and slightly frowned. Sure enough, there are no rank 3 disciples in this batch. It seems that this year there is no hope of getting any reward. Unlucky, really unlucky. Relying on these people to sacrifice enough power, how long will it take? I'm afraid that even if we wait for another 50 years, we won't be able to gather enough power to return to the head sect. Hearing this, the outer sect elder of the supreme immortal sect also had a bitter expression on his face. Although they could cultivate here and get the cultivation environment that only rank 4 disciples could have, but the resources here were too poor. In general, their cultivation speed had slowed down. Both of them were silent for a long time. Finally, when many of the light pillars began to dim and began to show other colors, the outer sect elder seemed to think of something and suddenly looked at the young man. At this moment, the outer sect elder showed a humble smile. He lowered his head and said flatteringly, "Senior apprentice brother, recently there are more and more people coming up. The number of outer sect disciples has almost reached the limit. Should we?" Speaking of this, the outer sect elder's eyes flashed a trace of cold, killing intent. Hearing this, the young man was silent for a while before lightly shaking his head. These outer sect disciples have wasted a lot of the head sect's resources. If we kill them like this, the gains will not make up for the losses. Rather than this, why don't we just send them back to the head sect and see if the head sect elders can extract anything useful from their bodies or directly refine them into human pills? In an instant, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with an incomparably cold light. He was really angry. He really wanted to go on a killing spree. Human pill. At the corner of his mouth, there was an endless cold smile. Lu Feng did not want to endure anymore. Others might not know about refining human pills, but as someone who had thoroughly read the 6 pill scriptures, how could Lu Feng not know about this taboo method of refining pills? The reason why it was a taboo method of refining pills was not because of how difficult it was to refine human pills. It was because its effects were heaven-defying, and its refining materials were even more heaven-defying. Heaven-defying, it really was heaven-defying. Human pills, as the name suggests, the most basic material to refine them, was a living person. This was to directly refine a human into a pill. This method of refining pills was indeed heaven-defying and shocking. Its effects were almost a grade higher than other pills of the same grade. In other words, a 6th-grade pill only had the effects of a 6th-grade pill. Even if it was refined by the most terrifying pill refiner, it would not be able to surpass the 6th grade. But a human pill was different. As long as it was successfully refined, then a 6th-grade human pill would have the same effects as a 7th-grade pill. Furthermore, using a human pill would not have any adverse effects. It could be said that the existence of a human pill was indeed incomparably shocking. But because it was directly refining a human into a pill, this method of refining pills was clearly forbidden, and no one was allowed to refine it. Lu Feng really did not expect that these people would have such an evil plan. Not only did they trick these ignorant commoners into sacrificing themselves, they even wanted to refine them into human pills after the sacrifice. Such a method could not be described with the word crazy. At this moment, Lu Feng's killing intent was so dense that it was about to materialize. Upon hearing the young man's suggestion, the outer sect elder's body trembled slightly. Clearly, he had not expected his senior brother to say such a thing. However, since he had already said it, it was not good for him to refute. In the next moment, he concealed his expression and nodded fiercely. Senior is still the one who plans far ahead, not giving up on any resources. Hearing this praise, the young man only smiled lightly and did not have any strange expression. If that's the case, then wait for a month and send this batch of people to the main sect. When the time comes and we refine a human pill, we will definitely not forget to give you a share. The elder's eyes lit up with excitement when he heard that he was going to get a share. He nodded fiercely, and at this moment, he also revealed an incomparably sinister smile. Very quickly, the sacrifice was finally completed. When the light pillar completely changed color and released the people who had sacrificed themselves, everyone revealed a dispirited expression. Dispirited, indeed, they were incomparably dispirited. So much of their essence, energy, and spirit had been sucked away, and even their lifespan had been greatly reduced. If there was no change, then something was really wrong. Of course, this did not include Lu Feng. With Lu Feng's existence, even the heavens could not take anything from him without his consent. What's more, these were just sacrificial items. However, Lu Feng did not stop sacrificing at all. He knew that the change in the light pillar was not only related to the sacrifice, but also to one's aptitude. After all, the extraction of fate was a test of one's aptitude. The more heaven-defying and monstrous a genius was, the more terrifying the fate they carried with them. Therefore, in many cases, one could see a person's aptitude just by looking at their fate. Unfortunately, Lu Feng wanted to release some fate, but he really did not have any fate to sacrifice or devour. When I walked out of the path, fate and whatnot had nothing to do with me. So this time, even if I wanted to sacrifice anything, there was nothing I could do. Lu Feng felt very helpless when he saw that the light pillar that belonged to him was completely black. Of course, his light pillar was not the only black one, because other than him, more than 200 people's light pillars were all black. Lu Feng was the taboo king, the most heaven-defying taboo king since ancient times. It was impossible to say that his aptitude was the same as these people. Therefore, Lu Feng felt that the so-called fate calculation aptitude was not very accurate. Finally, they slowly walked out of the light pillar. After these people saw that their light pillars were all black and were no different from the surrounding light pillars, they all showed a slightly depressed look. They knew that their aptitude was probably just like that, and there was nothing outstanding about it. However, these people still showed a smile in the next moment. Although they could not become first-rate geniuses, they felt very good to be able to become outer sect disciples. After all, This was an immortal sect. When these people appeared, the young existence from before had already left. Therefore, these people did not know that a young existence had come here. They did not know that the young existence had already made a plan, a vicious plan, to refine all of them into human pills. Chapter 804. In fact, Lu Feng really wanted to make a move because he had heard the conversation clearly. This was just a subsect of an immortal sect. Although there were a lot of inhibition spells here, and they were so powerful that Lu Feng was terrified from the conversation, he knew that there were not many strong people guarding this place. Most of them should be the few seniors and juniors mentioned by the two people just now. Junior brother, that's the outer sect elder. His strength is only at the middle level of perfect stage. As for that senior brother, he's only at the second level of demigod realm. This kind of strength is nothing. In Lu Feng's eyes, he was not afraid of a second-level demigod, even if it was a second-level demigod who could challenge peak geniuses who were 3 levels above him. Back then, he was only at the first level of demigod realm, but he was facing peak demigod supreme kings. He was the supreme king. They were all monstrous geniuses who were at the peak of the 7th level of emperor realm. Moreover, these monstrous geniuses could be ranked in the top 10 in the endless space-time. According to what they said, there shouldn't be any overly powerful disciples guarding this place. Then, even if they're in the divine realm, they're just SOSO. Although he was still at the peak of demigod realm and had not fully recovered. However, this didn't mean that Lu Feng didn't have any combat strength. Previously, Lu Feng already had enough power to fight and even suppress a peak true god. Now that he had recovered a part of his power, he could display the true space mystery. After displaying the space mystery, I'm not afraid of any beginner-level celestial god. I've comprehended the space-time law, which is one of the 3 great Emperor Realm laws. It's definitely not comparable to other laws. Therefore, ordinary beginner-level celestial gods are no match for me. They're definitely no match for me. With the power of a celestial god, this was enough for Lu Feng to run amok to a certain extent. Although celestial gods weren't considered peak existences, Lu Feng had also heard that the Great Han Empire should be a very inconspicuous small country in the entire world. The number of experts here was definitely limited. Therefore, with his current strength, he should be able to run amok. What a pity. If I had completely recovered my strength after 2 months, then I would have enough confidence to do anything. After 2 more months, Lu Feng's soul and body would be fully recovered. Then, he would be able to return to his peak state. At that time, his strength would definitely improve to an even more extreme level. Lu Feng believed that at that time, he would definitely have the power to fight against a peak heavenly god. It could be said that under the King Realm, he had reached the true peak. Furthermore, he still had his greatest trump card. As long as he could shatter the taboo and enter the battle prowess taboo mythological domain, his greatness would be unprecedented and he would become an eternal paragon existence. Even in this space left behind by the glorious immortal devil era, they were still the most terrifying supreme existences. Unfortunately, according to what they said, in a month's time, these people would be sent to the main sect to be refined into mortal dawn. Therefore, he only had a month's time. Of course, according to Lu Feng's character in the past, why would he need to wait for a month's time? He would probably have killed all these people long ago. However, it was different now. It was far different. This was because Lu Feng really didn't know anything about this world. He didn't know anything about it. Now that he had the time and the channels, what he needed was to understand the situation here before making any plans. After making up his mind, Lu Feng finally felt at ease. The outer sect elder gently waved his arm, as if sending out some signal. In the next moment, a group of disciples walked in from the side of the square. Looking at their clothes, they should be the outer sect disciples of the upper immortal sect. Looking at the appearance of these people walking over, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a hint of understanding. He could clearly feel that these outer sect disciples of the upper immortal sect were probably people who had sacrificed themselves. Although their essence, energy, and spirit seemed to be in good condition, this kind of good condition was completely a kind of flower in the mirror, the moon in the water. They had relied on something to forcefully raise it. In essence, they had already lost a lot of their essence, energy, and spirit. Once the medicinal effect disappeared, the damage they suffered would be even greater. Moreover, Lu Feng actually felt a strange feeling from these people, as if the sun was setting in the west. After thinking for a while, Lu Feng understood completely. He knew that this sacrifice wasn't just about their essence, energy, and spirit, but also their lives. In the process of the sacrifice, the life that was given to them had been burned and turned into power, all of which was absorbed by the light pillar. Looking at these people, Lu Feng gently let out a breath. He understood that unless they took some kind of pill that could increase their lifespan, these people would definitely end up dead. However, pills that can increase lifespan are definitely at the level of shocking godly items in the original universe. For those that are of a slightly higher level, I'm afraid that even the Divine King would want to snatch them. Although this is a remnant of the space of the immortal devil era, it should be very precious. To make such a thing for these people to use. Impossible, this was impossible. The upper immortal sect definitely wouldn't do this. Looking at these disciples who were brimming with pride, Lu Feng could only look on helplessly. Glancing slightly at the crowd, the outer sect elder of the upper immortal sect suddenly said, "These are all your senior brothers. You can all see their strength. Compared to all of you, they have only been here for half a year. However, in half a year, they already possess such strength. To have such strength in half a year was undoubtedly very shocking. Although the disciples who had just arrived might not be able to see through these people's strength, Lu Feng could already feel it. The disciples who had just arrived were basically senior warriors. Some of them were even infinitely close to the peak of the realm. However, Lu Feng also understood that this was the limit of their lives. These disciples would never be able to become warriors. In order to become a warrior, in addition to the need for comprehension of the state, the final moment of breakthrough required the fusion of essence, energy, and spirit. Only by completely fusing together could there be a possibility of a complete breakthrough and become a true warrior. Unfortunately, these people had used the sacrifice and lost too much of their essence, energy, and spirit. The shackles of the final moment, the shackles that had been broken by essence, energy, and spirit, would become shackles that they would never be able to break. Hearing the outer court elder's words, these new disciples all revealed an incomparably excited expression. Their eyes were completely filled with an indescribable color of turbulence. Half a year, only half a year. This time was really not much. It could even be said that it was far too little. However, in half a year, they had actually reached such a level and actually possessed such great strength. How could these new disciples not be excited? Glancing at them, the outer sect elder of the upper immortal sect said again, "From tomorrow onwards, you will officially start cultivating. When the time comes, the sect will give you some elixirs every day. What you need to do is to work hard to become stronger, stronger, and stronger. In addition, the elixirs given by the sect have the effect of changing your body's aptitude. Therefore, every once in a while, you can come to these plazas and test your aptitude on your own, just like before. If your aptitude can be improved, the resources you will receive will immediately double." Do you all understand? Hearing the words of the outer sect elder, these disciples' faces flushed red as they fantasized about the future and responded frantically. Lu Feng only smiled coldly. It was an incomparably cold smile. He finally understood the intentions of the upper immortal sect. Perhaps in their eyes, these new disciples, had not even been treated as humans. They were just existences that had been reared in captivity. They were pitiful existences that endlessly provided the power of the sacrifices. Their purpose in life was to continuously perform sacrifices. As for those so-called elixirs, they were not really provided for their cultivation. They were only meant to replenish their energy so that they would not die directly from long-term sacrifices. However, these people obviously did not know about these things. The consumption of those elixirs caused them to experience a kind of final radiance. It made them feel that their so-called strength was all fake. They were all duckweed without a foundation. These people didn't understand that they had already reached their limits. They weren't far from death. Lu Feng sighed softly and did not say anything in the end. However, just as he was about to leave with these senior brothers, he suddenly saw a scene that made him feel strange. Everyone who had arrived, including the senior brothers who had arrived earlier and the disciples who had arrived later, had a look of excitement on their faces. However, Lu Feng saw a person who was different from everyone else. He was the only one who did not have such an expression on his face. Of course, his face was similarly excited and filled with a kind of incomparable fanaticism. However, Lu Feng saw it clearly. Although that disciple also had an excited expression on his face, there was not the slightest hint of a smile in the depths of his eyes. What Lu Feng saw was a kind of silence, a kind of deathly stillness, a kind of sadness, and even a kind of despair. At this moment, Lu Feng really felt a little strange. This kind of expression was really too complicated for him to understand. However, Lu Feng knew that this young man should already know something. Without saying anything, Lu Feng walked directly to that person's side. "Senior brother, I wonder where our room is. Can I trouble you to send me there?" Obviously, that person did not expect Lu Feng to actually come to him directly. It was as if to show how amazing the achievements of cultivating here were. This time, the number of senior brothers who appeared to lead them back to their room was at least 300. Compared to the number of new disciples, there was a lot more. Basically, every new disciple had a senior brother by their side. Originally, he was only standing at the back. If he was here, there wouldn't be any new disciples that needed him to lead them. However, who would have thought that Lu Feng would actually give up on those senior brothers by his side and come here to find him? At this moment, the young senior brother looked at Lu Feng with an indescribable expression in his eyes. Of course, this indescribable expression was only for a moment. In the next moment, he returned to his previous smiling appearance. However, Lu Feng could clearly see that in the depths of his eyes, there was a slight trace of doubt and even vigilance. Lu Feng smiled gently and pretended not to see anything. He still looked as kind as before. "Since junior brother has requested it, then I will send you there. After all, our immortal sect is really too big." At this point, he even showed a hint of pride on his face. However, Lu Feng could see that in the depths of his eyes, there was a kind of disdain. At this moment, Lu Feng was even more certain that his senior brother must have known something. He did not say anything else. He just nodded to the man and said, "Then I will have to trouble you, senior brother, that you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."